Hey fam, this is Game of Theories. Today's story is gonna blow your mind. What if Jon Snow was raised by Daenerys in Old Valyria? Show some love with a like and subscribe. Here we go. Chapter 1. The smoking sea. The dragon came down out of a sky the color of old bruises, wings spread wide enough to swallow the sun, and Jaehaerys rode her like he'd been born to it, which, as it happened, he had. Valyria burned below him. It always burned. The doom had seen to that 4 centuries ago, cracking the peninsula open like a split log, drowning a civilization in fire and stone, and the screaming of 40,000 people who'd had absolutely no warning. The 14 flames still erupted in lazy columns along the horizon, and the smoking sea that surrounded the ruins threw up curtains of steam where ocean met magma. It smelled like sulfur and something older, like the inside of a forge that had never gone cold. Jaehaerys had grown up with that smell. He found it calming, the way other people found the smell of bread calming, or pine forests, or rain. He leaned forward against Jaehaerys' neck, not the original Jaehaerys, that one was centuries dead, but Daenerys had named this one the same, and the dragon seemed to wear the name like armor, and let the wind tear his hair back from his face. Down below, through smoke and sulphurous cloud, he could see the shape of the city. What was left of it anyway? And there was plenty left. That was the thing people didn't understand about Old Valyria, the thing they couldn't understand because none of them ever came here and survived long enough to report back. The doom hadn't destroyed everything. It had destroyed most things. It had collapsed half the city into the sea and buried the other half under ash and lava and the bones of 100 dragons. But Valyrian stone was Valyrian stone, and some of the old towers still stood, rising out of the ruin like fingers pointing accusations at the sky. The harbor was choked with wreckage, but the deeper docks, the ones cut directly into the volcanic rock, still held. The great road that had once connected the city center to the Dragonmont was cracked and heaved up by centuries of geological argument, but you could walk it if you knew where to put your feet. Jaehaerys knew where to put his feet. He'd been putting them there since he could walk. He pulled Jaehaerys into a banking turn and dropped lower, skimming over the eastern quarter of the ruins, where the old freehold's administrative buildings had once stood. Now they were skeletal, roofless stone shells half swallowed by vines that had learned, over 400 years, to grow in volcanic soil. He'd spent 3 weeks in those buildings when he was 12, picking through collapsed floors and half-buried chambers, salvaging what he could. He'd found scrolls in a sealed vault, Valyrian steel in a collapsed armory, and a room full of dragon eggs so old and cold they'd gone to stone. He'd brought the scrolls back to Daenerys, who'd wept over them quietly when she thought he was asleep. He'd pretended to be asleep. He always pretended to be asleep when she cried. Jaehaerys landed on the platform that jutted out from what Daenerys had long ago christened the Dragonspire, a tower in the eastern quarter that had survived the doom largely intact, its stone so thoroughly fused by ancient dragonfire that not even 4 centuries of geological chaos had managed to knock it down. It was tall enough to see clear to the smoking sea in 3 directions, and in the 4th direction you could see the Dragonmont itself, the great volcano that dominated the center of Old Valyria, the way a king dominates a court. Still active. Politely so, it rumbled and threw up ash now and then, but hadn't had a serious eruption in 60 years. Jaehaerys had a complicated relationship with it. He respected it the way you respected something that could kill you without effort or intention. He swung down from Jaehaerys' back and landed on the platform in a crouch, letting the impact travel through his knees and roll up through his spine the way Daenerys had taught him. Don't fight the landing. Receive it. One of her many lessons that sounded like philosophy until you fell badly enough to understand it was actually physics. You were low on that banking turn. said Daenerys, without looking up. She was sitting at the stone table near the tower's upper doorway, surrounded by maps. Real maps, not the rough charcoal sketches that passed for cartography in most of the world, but actual Valyrian navigational charts that she'd spent years acquiring through a network of agents in Bravos and Pentos, paying in dragon eggs and favors. And once, memorably, the implied threat of Drogon's existence. Drogon was beside her, curled around the base of the tower like a very large, very dangerous cat. His scales had gone almost completely black now, shot through with dark red where the firelight caught them. He opened one eye when Jaehaerys landed. Then he closed it again. They'd long since worked out their understanding. "I was testing her response," Jaehaerys said. "She compensates differently on port turns than starboard. I want to know why. She's been favoring her left shoulder since the sparring bout with Regal last week." Daenerys finally looked up, and her eyes, that particular Targaryen violet, the color of evening sky over water, moved over him with the same efficient assessment she applied to everything. Checking for injuries. She always did that. She probably didn't even know she did it anymore. "She needs another week of light flying before you push her." She didn't seem bothered. She's a dragon. She'd fly with a broken spine to please you, and you know that, which is exactly why you don't take advantage of it. He didn't argue. She was right, and they both knew it, and arguing when she was right was a waste of time he'd learned to spend elsewhere. He pulled off his riding gloves and dropped into the chair across from her, reaching for the water skin on the table. The water in Valyria tasted faintly of minerals, something from the volcanic rock it filtered through, and he'd grown up with that taste too. When Tyrion later gave him Myrish spring water, he'd find it disconcertingly bland. "Anything from the Bravosi?" he asked, nodding at the maps. "Not yet. The ship Morven was using was last seen rounding the stepstones 3 weeks ago. Either he's delayed or—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. "Or someone in Bravos decided our gold wasn't worth the risk of whatever favor Cersei is offering." Daenerys' jaw tightened. Not much, just a fractional shift in her expression that most people would have missed. Jaehaerys had been reading her face since he was old enough to know what faces meant, and he cataloged the movement automatically. Controlled anger, directed inward, which means she already suspected this and is annoyed at herself for hoping otherwise. "The Iron Bank has been drifting toward her for 2 years," she said. "It was inevitable. Then we stop waiting for Bravosi information and go get it ourselves. We're not ready. You keep saying that." He said it without heat, leaning back in his chair, watching her. "You've been saying it for 3 years. The world doesn't wait for ready, Dany. It just moves. Don't call me Dany. You hate it less than you pretend to." She gave him the look, the one that had leveled lesser men at 50 paces, the one she'd used on slave masters in a Stapper and Calls in V's Dothrak and sellsword captains who'd thought that a woman who talked quietly was a woman who could be dismissed. He received it the way he received hard landings, without fighting it. "We have 3 dragons," she said. "That should be decisive. That should be everything. But Westeros has castles and armies and 14 years of political arrangements that I haven't been a part of. If we fly in breathing fire and wearing Targaryen sigils, we win the battle and lose the continent. People will fight us out of fear alone. People are already dying out of that same fear. In the north. I know what's happening in the north." "Do you?" "Because the last report from Morven before he disappeared said the dead were past Hardhome. Past Hardhome, Daenerys. In 3 years they'll be at the wall. In 5, I know." Her hand came down on the table, flat, controlled, but it still made the maps jump. Drogon opened his eye again. Neither of them acknowledged it. "I know. And I am telling you that charging in blindly will not save the people in the north. It will give Cersei the chaos she needs to fracture every lord south of the neck against us, and then we'll be fighting a war on 2 fronts with all 3 dragons exhausted from one battle. So yes, we plan. Yes, we wait. Not forever, but long enough to do this right. Jaehaerys was quiet for a moment, studying the maps on the table between them. The continent of Westeros lay there in careful ink, its coastlines, its castles, its roads. He'd spent his whole life looking at that map. He knew it better than he knew his own face. He'd memorized every castle, every pass, every river. He'd read every account of every battle fought on that land that Daenerys' agents had managed to acquire. He'd read the histories Daenerys had salvaged from Old Valyria's ruins, the letters and chronicles from the Targaryen kings who'd ruled that place for 300 years. He had never once set foot on that soil. It didn't feel like home. It didn't feel like anything except a problem he intended to solve. 2 months, he said finally. Daenerys looked at him. I'll give the Braavosi 2 more months, he said. If Morven hasn't made contact by then, we move without him. We go to Dragonstone first. It's ours, it's defensible, and it's close enough to King's Landing that Cersei will have to respond without being so close that she can hit us in the first hour. We establish a position. We send ravens. We let people come to us. Daenerys studied him for a long moment. He could see her working through the objections, testing the plan against the shape of the problem, the way she'd taught him to think. She'd built his mind the same way she'd built everything else about him, deliberately, methodically, with the long view always in focus. 2 months, she said finally, and you spend those 2 months on Valyrian High. I want you at least conversational before we land on Westerosi soil. I'm already conversational in Valyrian High. You're profane in Valyrian High, there's a difference. But the corner of her mouth moved. Barely, just enough. He grinned at her, sudden and genuine, the grin that had absolutely no political calculation in it, the one that had been making her exasperated since he was 3 years old. Teach me the polite words then. You'd never use them. I might. You absolutely wouldn't. He reached across and stole the last of the dried figs from the plate at her elbow, and she slapped the back of his hand without any real force behind it. And for a moment they were just what they were, not the last of the Targaryens, not the Dragon Queen and the prince that was promised, not the 2 people carrying the weight of a fallen dynasty and an ancient prophecy and a dead civilization, just a young man and the woman who'd raised him, sitting in the ruins of the world they'd been born to inherit. Arguing over fruit. Then Regal screamed. The sound came from the south, from the direction of the smoking sea, and both of them were on their feet before the echo finished. Jaehaerys had his sword in hand without remembering drawing it. L'Oncle, Valyrian steel, salvaged from a collapsed armory in the ruins' 2nd year, reforged and rehandled by Daenerys herself over 6 months of patient metallurgical work, was already bright in the afternoon light. Drogon had uncoiled from his position, and was lifting from the platform in a rush of displaced air that nearly knocked Jaehaerys sideways. South, Daenerys said, already moving to the tower's edge, her eyes sharp. Regal screamed again, and then they could see him, the green-gold dragon circling out over the smoking sea, maybe 2 miles out, low over the water. He was circling something, not attacking it, circling it. Jaehaerys shaded his eyes with his hand. The steam from the sea was thick in the late afternoon light, and for a moment he couldn't see anything but Regal's shape moving against it. Then the steam shifted and he saw the ship. It was small, a galley, single-masted, flying no colors he recognized from this distance, listing slightly to port as if something below the waterline had taken damage. It was barely moving. The smoking sea was doing things to it that the smoking sea always did to ships that were foolish enough to try to navigate it. The water was hot in patches, laced with underwater volcanic vents, and the steam that rose from it played havoc with navigation and took the starch out of sails entirely. Ships that entered the smoking sea generally did not exit it, which was precisely why Valyria made such an excellent stronghold for 2 people and 3 dragons who preferred to remain hidden from the world. That ship wasn't there this morning, Jaehaerys said. Number, they must have come in during the night, navigating blind in the dark across the smoking sea, which means either they're extraordinarily desperate or extraordinarily well-informed about where not to sail. Daenerys' voice was carefully even. Get Jaehaerys, go take a look. Don't burn anything until I say. What if they're armed? Then they'd have attacked Regal by now. Go. Jaehaerys went. Jaehaerys launched from the platform with a sound like a thunderclap, and he bent low against her neck as she climbed, angling toward the sea. The heat hit him as they dropped below the ridgeline and into the steam belt that surrounded the peninsula, a thick, soupy warmth that smelled of minerals and deep earth. He'd long since stopped noticing the temperature. He'd been flying through it since he was 10 years old, when Daenerys had first let him take Jaehaerys out alone, watching from the platform with her arms crossed and her jaw set, and every muscle in her body working very hard to appear relaxed. He came in low over the listing galley and did a pass at about 50 feet, enough to see the deck clearly. 8 men that he could count, some of them at the oars, some just standing at the rail looking up at him, with the expressions of people who had fully accepted that they were about to die. One man at the stern, short, wearing a heavy travel cloak that was entirely wrong for the climate, with pale hair and mismatched eyes that Jaehaerys could somehow see even at this distance, looking up at him not with terror, but with something that looked almost indecently like fascination. He pulled Jaehaerys around for another pass, slower this time, lower. The man at the stern didn't move, didn't duck, didn't run or draw a weapon or fall to his knees in the universal gesture of people who wanted very much not to be on fire. He just watched, and when Jaehaerys passed close enough that the downwash from her wings should by rights have blown him flat, he grabbed a rope with one hand to steady himself and kept watching. Jaehaerys had grown up around people who were afraid of dragons. You could read it in every line of their bodies, the stillness of prey, the flinching, the way they stopped being fully human and became just a survival instinct wearing a human suit. He'd seen it in Valyrian ruins on the rare occasions their agents came to deliver reports, seen it in the one occasion a free city's merchant had tried to sail a diplomatic ship through the smoking sea, and ended up running back the way he came when Regal looked at him funny. This man was not doing any of those things. He was looking at Jaehaerys the way Jaehaerys looked at a complicated problem, with interest, maybe a little awe, but functional awe, the kind that processes what it's seeing rather than the kind that just short-circuits. Interesting. He brought Jaehaerys down onto the water. She hated that, but she did it, landing with a crash and a hiss of steam as her scales met the hot surface of the smoking sea, close enough to the galley's bow that the ship's prow nearly touched her wing. The sailors at the oars scrambled back. 2 of them made signs he recognized as Westerosi luck prayers. The short man at the stern made his way carefully along the tilted deck to the prow. Up close, Jaehaerys revised his estimate, not short, but not a dwarf in the sense of being small everywhere, proportioned differently, with a large head and deep-set mismatched eyes, one green, one black, and a face that had clearly been through some serious difficulty at some point, given the scar that ran from jaw to nose where another nose had apparently once been. The man looked at Jaehaerys with the expression of someone who was doing mental calculations at high speed and finding most of the results surprising. "You're real," the man said, in a voice that was rich and dry and apparently entirely unbothered by the fact that he was in the smoking sea on a listing ship being scrutinized by a dragon. "I was told dragons were extinct. I was also told that Old Valyria was uninhabitable. I've been badly misinformed on multiple fronts." "Who are you?" Jaehaerys said. He kept his voice flat, not aggressive, just flat, which was its own kind of assertion. "Tyrion Lannister," said the man. Late of King's Landing, recently of Essos, apparently currently of a nautical disaster. And he paused. He was looking at Jaehaerys with an expression Jaehaerys couldn't read, and he was a man who could read most expressions. You're young. I don't know what I expected, truthfully. Something older, more ash-covered maybe. Why are you in the smoking sea, Tyrion Lannister? I'm looking for the Dragon Queen. He said it without the dramatic weight that statement might have carried from someone else. Just said it the way you state a navigation destination, a simple fact of direction. I have information she needs. I have. Some things happened in Westeros that I believe she may be unaware of, and I believe, for a variety of reasons I can explain at length once someone gives me water that doesn't smell like a hot spring, that she is the correct person to be made aware of them. Jaehaerys studied him for a long beat. The man held his gaze without blinking. How did you find us? Deduction, mostly. Some documents from the Citadel that I liberated with the help of a disgruntled Meister, and a Braavosi information trader named Morven who was very forthcoming once I explained that I wasn't actually working for my sister. Something shifted in his expression, briefly, just briefly, something that might have been grief or guilt before the dry intelligence closed over it again. He's alive, incidentally. Morven. He's in Braavos, slightly richer and somewhat more cautious. He asked me to tell you he's sorry about the delay. Jaehaerys processed that. Then he looked at the 8 sailors, who were all watching this exchange with the combined energy of people watching a man argue with a natural disaster. Your men will stay on the ship, he said. You come with me. Tyrion Lannister spread his hands in a gesture of easy agreement. I was hoping you'd say something like that. Jaehaerys went back to Jaehaerys' neck, and after a moment of assessment, the assessment, he would later note, of a man deciding whether a dragon is safe to approach the way one might decide whether a large dog is safe to approach. Through a combination of body language reading and sheer brass, Tyrion Lannister followed him up. You know, Tyrion said, settling himself awkwardly behind Jaehaerys on the dragon's neck, when I imagined this moment I pictured it slightly less. He searched for the word. Humid. Jaehaerys didn't answer. He gave Jaehaerys the signal. She lifted from the water in a great crashing surge, and Tyrion Lannister made a sound behind him that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh before going quiet. And for a few minutes there was nothing but the wind and the steam and the slow revelation of Old Valyria coming up out of the haze below them. Tyrion went quiet for a long time after that. Jaehaerys felt him shift once, sitting straighter, taking in what he was seeing. The ruins below, the towers still standing, the road still visible through centuries of volcanic growth. The 3 other dragons, Drogon was high above them now, a black shape against the sky, and Rhaegal was circling the ship to make sure nobody was doing anything regrettable. 7 hells, Tyrion said softly, to nobody in particular. It's actually here. Did you think it wasn't? I thought it might be. I've been in the business of believing improbable things for the last 2 years. I find it suits me better than the alternative. A pause. How long have you been living here? My whole life. Another pause. Jaehaerys could feel Tyrion recalibrating. And you are. You'll ask Daenerys that question, Jaehaerys said. Not me. Tyrion accepted this without argument, which rose further in Jaehaerys' estimation, because it meant the man understood the difference between information he needed immediately and information he could wait for. Daenerys was on the platform when they landed. She'd clearly been watching their approach from the tower's upper level, and she looked at Tyrion Lannister with an expression that was absolutely neutral, which meant she was working very hard. Jaehaerys had a theory that Daenerys' expressions tracked inversely to the importance she attached to something. The more neutral she looked, the more she cared. She looked completely neutral. Tyrion stepped off Jaehaerys and stood in the middle of the platform and looked at Daenerys the way he'd looked at the ruins from the air, with careful, comprehensive attention. Tyrion Lannister, Daenerys said. It wasn't a greeting. It was a categorization. "Your Grace," said Tyrion, and he bent his knee, not with the theatrical production that knighting sometimes generated, not the full prostration of the supplicant. A clean, honest bow from someone who understood what the gesture meant and offered it deliberately. "I come to you without soldiers, without ships, without an army. What I have instead is information worth more than all three if you'll hear it." "I'll hear it," Daenerys said, "but first." Her eyes moved to Jaehaerys just briefly. "Help him get off that wet cloak, and get him water, actual water." Jaehaerys nearly said something, caught the micro-expression on Daenerys' face, and went to get water instead. He was back in 3 minutes with a skin of clean water and a cup, and Tyrion took it with the genuine gratitude of a man who had been thirsty for longer than was dignified. "Now," Daenerys said, settling into her chair at the stone table with all the ease of someone who has been sitting in judgment seats long enough that they feel like extensions of herself, "tell me about Westeros." So Tyrion told them. He talked for 2 hours. Not all of it was news. Some of it Daenerys' agents had already reported, or she'd inferred from the shape of events. Cersei on the Iron Throne, burning the Great Sept, shattering the power of the Faith and the Tyrells in a single stroke. The Lannister army pulling back to the Crownlands, consolidating, rebuilding. The Lords of the Reach and the Stormlands and the Riverlands in various states of confusion and resentment and terrified compliance. But some of it was new. Some of it sat in the air of the platform like something that had changed the temperature. The North. Jaehaerys was watching Daenerys' face when Tyrion described what was happening in the North, and something moved across her expression that he'd rarely seen there. Not fear. Daenerys didn't do fear in the conventional sense. It was more like the expression of someone revising a calculation that had previously seemed complete. "How many?" Jaehaerys asked. Tyrion looked at him. "The estimates range from 100,000 to, how many of the Night Kings dead are past the wall?" "None yet. The wall is still standing." Tyrion paused. "For now. The Night's Watch is reduced, and the wildlings who were beyond the wall have largely come through it or tried to, the ones that didn't." He didn't finish that. "And Jon Snow," Daenerys said. She said it carefully, and Jaehaerys noted the care and said nothing. Tyrion was quiet for a moment. He looked at Daenerys, then at Jaehaerys, and something in his face settled into an expression that was more careful than anything else he'd worn since landing. "Jon Snow is dead," he said. "He was Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. His own men killed him." But then he stopped, chose his words. "There are stories coming out of Castle Black, stories about a red priestess named Melisandre, about a body that didn't stay dead." He looked at Jaehaerys again, this time with the particular attention of a man who has just noticed that 2 things he thought were separate are in fact the same thing. "He came back. They say he came back." The platform was very quiet. The Dragonmont grumbled somewhere to the west, a low tectonic complaint. Jaehaerys looked at Daenerys. "You knew," he said. "It wasn't an accusation. It was just a recognition." "I suspected," she said. "I've known for 3 years that Rhaegar's son survived. I told you your parents' names when you were old enough to understand them. I never told you about the Night's Watch because She stopped, looked at the map on the table. "Because he was living a life that was his, and you were living a life that was yours, and I needed time to think about what it would mean when the 2 of them came together." "It means I have a brother," Jaehaerys said. "It means you have a rival," Tyrion said, with the particular tone of a man who regrets being the accurate person in the room. "Or that's how Westeros will see it. 2 Targaryens, both with a claim. The Lords will make it into a conflict whether you want it to be or not. Then the Lords can be disappointed," Jaehaerys said. He said it with complete simplicity, the way you state a geographical fact. "He's my blood. Whatever he is, he's my blood. I don't fight my blood." Daenerys was watching him with an expression he almost never saw on her face, something warm and unguarded and slightly surprised, as if he'd said something she'd hoped for but hadn't let herself expect. You haven't met him yet, she said. Doesn't matter. It will. Maybe. He stood up, and something shifted in the air around him. Not dramatically, not with any particular announcement, just the way the air around a fire shifts when you add more wood. But right now, the question isn't Jon Snow. The question is whether we move before the 2 months are up. Tyrion looked between them. What happens in 2 months? Nothing now, Jaehaerys said. We leave in 2 weeks. Daenerys said, 3 weeks. They looked at each other. 3 weeks, Jaehaerys said, and Daenerys' mouth curved just slightly in what another person might have called a smile. Tyrion Lannister looked at the two of them, then looked around at the ruins of Old Valyria surrounding them. The burned towers, the heaved roads, the black sky and the sulfur air and the 3 dragons moving through it like they owned it, which they did, technically, and he said very quietly, I am going to need significantly more wine. The next 3 weeks passed in the way that preparation always passes, both too fast and not fast enough, depending on what you were preparing for and how afraid of it you were. Jaehaerys was afraid of nothing, which meant the 3 weeks passed too slowly. He trained. He'd always trained, but there was something different about training now that a departure date existed, an edge to it, a sharpness, like the difference between running drills and running towards something. He ran the old Valyrian roads at dawn, the cracked volcanic stone under his boots, covering ground in the early morning before the heat of the day made it punishing. He drilled with Longclaw against the practice stones he'd set up in the eastern courtyard, working combinations until they were inside his body, the way language was inside a native speaker. Not thought, just done. He flew Jaehaerys every afternoon, taking her further and faster than before, learning her outside limits, testing the shoulder that Daenerys had been right about. Tyrion watched sometimes. He had that quality, the ability to observe without announcing himself, to sit quietly at the edge of whatever was happening and take it in. Jaehaerys respected it. He'd met enough men who filled every silence with their own voice to appreciate someone who knew when not to. You know, Tyrion said one evening, watching Jaehaerys work through a blade sequence on the eastern platform while the sun went down behind the Dragonmont, throwing the whole city into amber shadow. I've seen the Unsullied. I've seen Dothraki. I've seen knights who have been fighting since before they could walk. He paused. You're something else. I had a good teacher, Jaehaerys said, not breaking the sequence. Daenerys taught you to fight. She started it. I finished it. He stopped, lowered the blade. She taught me everything I needed to survive here. The fighting I figured out because Valyria has things in it that didn't leave when the people did. At Tyrion's look, he said, old things, stone creatures. Things that were bound to the city by Valyrian magic that didn't stop when the magicians died. You learn to fight, or you don't last long exploring ruins. You've been exploring ruins since childhood. What else was I going to do? Tyrion laughed. It was a genuine laugh, surprised out of him. Fair point. He looked at the ruins around them, the long shadows, the distant rumble of the earth. Did she, he chose the next words carefully, did she ever tell you what she expected, what she was preparing you for? Jaehaerys thought about that. He cleaned the blade with the cloth at his belt and sheathed it, and sat on the edge of the platform with his legs hanging over the drop to the courtyard 40 feet below. A thing he'd been doing since he was 8 years old, and that had given Daenerys her first gray hair, allegedly. She told me I was the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, he said. She told me I had blood on both ends, dragon and wolf. She told me that the Targaryens had lost the throne because they forgot that ruling is about more than fire. She told me about prophecy, the prince that was promised, Azor Ahai, the song of ice and fire, and she told me to treat all of it as useful context and none of it as instruction. Wise. She's the wisest person I know. He said it without any ceremony, just stating it. But wisdom and right aren't always the same thing. She wants this to be careful. She wants every move planned, every angle covered. He looked south in the direction of the sea, in the direction of the coast that was beyond the sea, in the direction of the land that was beyond the coast. People are dying. People are dying right now, tonight, in the north, and they're dying in the riverlands from Lannister cruelty, and they're dying in the south from starvation because the wars have ruined the harvest patterns. And we're here, with 3 dragons, and I'm done being here. Tyrion was quiet for a moment. You know, when I came here, I expected to be making the case for urgency to the Dragon Queen. I didn't expect. He looked at Jaehaerys. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Honestly, a boy, someone she'd raised to be her. He stopped. Her instrument. Jaehaerys looked at him directly. If she tried to raise me as her instrument, he said, I would have turned out very different. She didn't do that. She raised me to think. He paused. The thinking led me to the same place she wanted to go. That's not the same as being pointed there. Tyrion studied him with those mismatched eyes, the evaluating look, the one that was doing calculations. Then he nodded, slowly, with the weight of someone who has just updated something important. No, he said, it's not. The night before they were to leave, Jaehaerys went up to the highest point of the Dragonspire, a narrow ledge above the top floor, accessible by a crumbling exterior stair that he'd been climbing since he was 12, and looked out over Valyria for a long time. The 14 flames burned in the distance. The smoking sea steamed and shifted. The ruins spread below him in every direction, beautiful and broken, the bones of the greatest civilization the world had ever seen, fire-killed and 4 centuries cold. His home, he didn't love it the way Daenerys loved it. She loved it with the complicated grief of someone who had grown up dreaming of something lost, and then found the loss itself and made peace with it. He loved it the way you love the thing that made you, simply, without needing it to be anything other than what it was. But he was done with it. He heard her step on the stair behind him. He always heard her because she'd taught him to hear everything and didn't turn. The dragons are ready, she said, coming to stand beside him. I know. A long silence. Below them, Drogon moved through the city in the darkness, a shadow among shadows. I need to tell you something, Daenerys said. He looked at her. She was looking out at the sea, and her profile was the profile of every Targaryen portrait he'd ever studied from the salvaged histories, the set of the jaw, the quality of the stillness. When I found you, when I came for you, after Rhaegar died and Lyanna died and the rebellion ended, I came for you because of the prophecy, yes, she paused, and because you were Rhaegar's son, and because you had no one. But I want you to know that none of those reasons are why I stayed in Valyria for 16 years. He waited. I stayed, she said, because of you, not the prophecy, not the dynasty. You, she finally looked at him, and her expression was open in a way that she almost never allowed, the armor set aside deliberately and completely. Whatever happens in Westeros, whatever you find there, whoever you meet, whatever they tell you about who you are and what you're supposed to do, remember that. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and put his arm around her shoulders, which was something he almost never did, because they were not, in the ordinary run of things, demonstrative with each other. She was still for a moment, and then she leaned her head against his shoulder just briefly, and they stood together on the high ledge above the city of their ancestors while the fires burned in the distance and the sea steamed and the world waited. Let's go take back the throne, he said. Let's go save the world, she corrected. Both, he said. Both, she agreed. Below them, Jaehaerys stirred and spread her wings, catching the thermals rising from the volcanic rock, and her shadow fell across the whole of Old Valyria, across every tower, every road, every ruin of a world that had once been the center of everything. In the morning, the 3 dragons would rise over the smoking sea and turn west, toward the continent that neither Jaehaerys nor Daenerys had ever stood on, toward the war that had been waiting for them, toward all the things that came next. For now, There was just the fire and the dark and the two last Targaryens, watching over the only home they'd ever known for the last time. Chapter 2. The dwarf who walked into fire. The crossing took 4 days. Jaehaerys had read about the narrow sea. He'd read Valyrian accounts of it, Westerosi accounts, free cities trading logs. He knew its width at various latitudes, its current patterns, its seasonal storms. He knew it intellectually the way he knew everything about Westeros, completely and from the outside. Actually flying over it was something else. He'd expected open water and he got that. He'd expected wind and he got that too, cold and salt-edged in a way that was entirely different from the volcanic warmth he'd grown up with, cutting through his riding leathers in the first hour and not stopping. What he hadn't expected was the feeling of the distance itself, the way the world opened up when you left the smoking sea behind, and the haze cleared, and suddenly you could see for 50 miles in every direction. Nothing but gray-green water below and pale sky above, and the far impossibility of a coastline somewhere ahead that was growing infinitesimally larger with every hour. He hadn't expected to feel anything about it. He found that he did. Tyrion rode with him again. The man had, with remarkable efficiency, simply designated himself a permanent fixture on Jaehaerys' neck, and Jaehaerys had not objected because Tyrion in conversation was preferable to Tyrion with nothing to do, which was apparently when he drank. He talked for most of the first day. Geography at first, useful things, the layout of Dragonstone, the safe approaches, the tides around Blackwater Bay. Then history, which Jaehaerys mostly already knew, but let Tyrion tell anyway because the Lannister version of Targaryen history had interesting editorial differences from the Valyrian version, and the gaps between them were informative. Then on the second day, when the coast of Westeros was still just a theory on the horizon and the wind had settled into a steady westerly that pushed them along without requiring much correction, Tyrion said, "Tell me about growing up there." Jaehaerys was quiet for a moment, watching the water below. Jaehaerys' shadow moved across it like a second, darker wave. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." A pause. "I'm trying to understand what you are. Not as a Targaryen, not as whatever the prophecy makes you. What you actually are, as a person." Another pause. "It matters, for what comes next. People need to know what to make of you." "People will make of me what they decide to make of me," Jaehaerys said. "That's their business. With respect, number, that's your business, whether you want it to be or not. Every lord you meet in Westeros has a story about Targaryens already written in their head. Most of those stories end badly. You need to be something they didn't write." Jaehaerys thought about that. Daenerys used to say that the Targaryens lost Westeros twice, once to the doom and once to their own worst impulses. The second time was worse because they had everything and chose fire anyway. She's not wrong. She's usually not. He adjusted his grip on Jaehaerys' neck, watching the horizon. Growing up there it wasn't soft. The ruins themselves aren't dangerous if you know them, but knowing them takes time, and while you're learning you make mistakes. I broke my arm in a collapsed vault when I was 7. Cut my leg badly enough in a flooded passage at 9 that Daenerys thought I might lose it. He said this without drama, the way you describe weather. She was up for 3 days, cleaning it, watching the infection. She didn't sleep. Did you lose it? Clearly not. He glanced down at his leg, as if to verify. She knew Valyrian medical texts. She knew which plants grew in volcanic soil that had properties the Meisters in their citadel have never catalogued. She fixed it. A pause. "That was the year she started teaching me field medicine." "She sounds formidable." "You'll stop saying it that way after you've actually talked to her," Jaehaerys said. "Formidable sounds like a wall. She's not a wall. He searched for the analogy. "You know what a river looks like when it goes around a rock, how it doesn't stop or break, it just finds a new path and goes faster." "Yes, that's more accurate." Tyrion was quiet for a moment, apparently revising something. And the dragons, you grew up with 3 of them. 4 briefly. She hatched a 4th when I was about 5, smaller than the others. It didn't live long. He said it simply, but there was something behind the simplicity, not grief exactly, but the particular way grief becomes part of the texture of a person when they've held it long enough. The 3 that survived, I grew up alongside them. Regal and I were, friendly is the wrong word for a dragon, present with each other. We understood each other. Jaehaerys chose me when I was 8. I didn't choose her. She just started following me on the ground, which dragons apparently don't do, according to Daenerys. Daenerys says it's the Targaryen blood. Is it? Probably. Doesn't feel mystical from the inside. It feels like having a very large, very opinionated companion who breathes fire when irritated. He paused. Not unlike some people. Tyrion laughed, and it startled him again, the genuine quality of it, not performed, just real. And weapons, you've clearly been trained, by Daenerys first, then by a man named Corvo. At Tyrion's look he explained, Daenerys' network in Pentos includes a retired, unsullied officer who left after the sack of a stapper, not because he was freed. He left because he wanted to. He came to Valyria twice, 3 months each time when I was 12 and 14. He taught me unsullied formations and spear technique. Daenerys paid him in dragon knowledge. He wanted to understand dragon behavior. She let him observe Drogon. What kind of swords does an unsullied officer teach? He didn't teach me swords. I already knew swords. He taught me how to fight groups, how to read multiple attackers, control the space between them, make their numbers work against them. He paused. That was useful. The ruins had, I told you about the stone creatures. Sometimes there were several at once. Stone creatures, Tyrion repeated. You said this before. What exactly? Bound spirits. Things the Valyrian freehold anchored to physical forms with magic that was designed to last. Guardians mostly, set to protect certain vaults or structures. When they sensed someone alive moving through their territory, they woke up. He considered how to describe it. They were slow, mostly, but very hard to damage, and they kept moving after most wounds that would stop a person. You learn to target specific joints, specific points, or you learn to work around them entirely and find another route. Tyrion was doing the calculations again. Jaehaerys could feel it in the quality of his silence. So by the time you come to Westeros, he said slowly, you've been fighting magical stone guardians in the ruins of a dead civilization since childhood. Since I was about 9, yes. And you've been riding a dragon since you were 8. Unofficially since 6, officially since 8. And you're 16, 16 and a half. Of course, Tyrion paused. You know, I've been thinking about how to present you to the lords of Westeros, and I keep arriving at the same problem. What problem? The problem is that you're real. Lords can process stories. They can negotiate with stories. They can rewrite stories to suit themselves. But you, he gestured vaguely at the general situation. The dragon, the Valyrian steel at Jaehaerys' hip, the ruins shrinking behind them. You're not a story, you're a fact, and facts are harder to manage. I'm not asking to be managed. No, Tyrion agreed. That's exactly the problem. On the morning of the 3rd day, Dragonstone appeared. Jaehaerys had seen paintings of it salvaged from Valyrian historical archives, the island's stronghold that Enar Targaryen had brought his family to, along with 5 dragons and the prophetic warning from his daughter Daenerys that had saved their line, while the doom consumed everyone else. The paintings had been accurate in the way that architectural plans are accurate, correct in every measurable sense, and still somehow failing to capture the thing itself. It sat in the mouth of Blackwater Bay like a clenched fist, black stone carved by Valyrian craft into dragon shapes that blurred the line between architecture and sculpture, towers that coiled like necks, battlements that spread like wings. The volcanic rock it was built on rose sheer from the water on 3 sides, and the approach from the sea required navigating between rock formations that had been artfully made more dangerous over the centuries. Even from the air, it had a weight to it. An old, specific kind of gravity. Daenerys was 3 hours behind him. She'd taken a different route with Drogon, sweeping south to avoid shipping lanes that Tyrion had marked on their charts. The plan was simple. Jaehaerys lands first, assesses the situation, holds the island. Daenerys arrives and they establish their base of operations before sending any communication to the mainland. Simple plans were best because they were the easiest to adapt when they went wrong. What was on Dragonstone was not an empty castle. He saw the ships first, 6 galleys anchored in the island's harbor, flying gold and crimson. Lannister colors. He saw the soldiers on the battlements below, small as ants from this height, but he could see their helms catching the morning light. He saw the garrison flag flying from the highest tower, Lannister lion, not the old 3-headed dragon. Cersei had garrisoned Dragonstone. Of course she had. Of course she had. It was the most defensible position in the bay, and a queen who just blown up her most powerful domestic enemies and consolidated power through terror would absolutely garrison the one place that a returning Targaryen claimant would use as their first stepping stone. It was obvious in retrospect. Tyrion said something quietly that sounded like self-recrimination. "How many?" Jaehaerys asked. Tyrion was shading his eyes, counting. 200, maybe 250. 3 knights by the quality of the armor on the tower, the rest are sellswords or pressed garrison troops, given the cut of their gear. How many of those garrison troops want to die for a Lannister queen on a volcanic island? Tyrion looked at him. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that 200 men with swords look very different after they've had a moment to assess the situation. He brought Jaehaerys into a wide circle over the harbor, slow and deliberate, low enough to be unmistakable. He could see the scramble starting on the walls below, men moving, shouting, pointing. A horn sounding, then another. The ships in the harbor starting to shift as the crews reacted. Watch. He brought Jaehaerys down. Not to attack. He aimed for the open courtyard at the top of the castle's approach road, the broad, flat space between the gatehouse and the main doors, and Jaehaerys landed there with a crash of stone, and a sound like a thunderclap that he felt in his sternum. The downdraft from her wings knocked 2 soldiers off their feet on the nearest battlement. Jaehaerys slid from her neck before she'd even fully settled, hit the stone in a crouch, and stood up. There were 12 men in the courtyard. They had their weapons drawn. Every single one of them was frozen. Jaehaerys looked at them. He was not wearing armor, he was wearing riding leathers, dark, fitted, unremarkable. He had Longclaw at his hip, not drawn. He was 16 years old, and he stood in the middle of their drawn weapons and their defensive formation, and looked at them the way he looked at a complicated passage in a Valyrian history text, with calm, comprehensive attention, and said, in a clear, carrying voice, "I am Jaehaerys Targaryen, son of Rhaegar Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. This is my ancestral seat. I am here to occupy it." He paused. "I would prefer to do this without killing anyone. The preference is genuine." Silence. The dragon behind him breathed, a long, slow exhale that sent a wave of heat rolling across the courtyard and made every torch in the sconces suddenly burn higher. One of the soldiers, a young man not much older than Jaehaerys, helmet slightly askew from the downdraft, eyes very wide, looked at his neighbor. His neighbor looked back. 100 feet of silent communication in 2 seconds. The soldier with the askew helmet lowered his sword. Then the next man lowered his. Then the next. It moved through the 12 men in the courtyard like a wave, weapons dropping or sheathing, men stepping back or shifting their weight from combat ready to something closer to simply standing. Not surrender exactly, something more pragmatic than surrender, a collective, instantaneous recognition that the calculation had changed. "Your captain," Jaehaerys said. "Get him." By the time Tyrion had climbed carefully down from Jaehaerys' neck, the captain of the Dragonstone garrison had arrived in the courtyard. He was a hard-looking man in his 40s, grizzled in the way that men who have survived a long time in difficult places are grizzled, with the bearing of someone who had been a soldier long enough to have developed genuine tactical sense. He looked at Jaehaerys. He looked at Jaehaerys. He looked at Tyrion, and something shifted in his expression, recognition, and with it, a rapid recalculation. "Lord Tyrion," the captain said. "Sir Aldrich," Tyrion said mildly, "I see you've kept the place in good condition. Queen Cersei garrisoned it personally." He said it with a flatness that told you exactly how much enthusiasm he'd brought to the assignment. "Queen Cersei isn't here," Jaehaerys said. "I am." Sir Aldrich looked at him for a long moment. There was the assessment again, the evaluation that Jaehaerys had been receiving since the harbor, every soldier's eyes running over him and arriving at the same complicated place between what they'd expected and what they were seeing. "If I march my men out of here," the captain said, "Cersei kills me." "If you stay," Jaehaerys said, "you're declaring war against the rightful king on behalf of a usurper, and the outcome of that war becomes your permanent legacy." He paused. "Or you march your men to the harbor, take your ships, and sail north to Gulton, and send a raven to King's Landing saying Dragonstone was taken by force, and you couldn't hold it against 3 dragons. Cersei is many things. She's not unreasonable about military reality." Sir Aldrich studied him. "That's a generous offer for a man with a dragon already in my courtyard." "I'm not trying to kill soldiers who are following orders," Jaehaerys said. "I'm trying to take my castle. Those are different objectives." The silence stretched. Somewhere on the walls, someone dropped a spear with a loud clatter. 2 hours, Sir Aldrich said finally. "Give me 2 hours to organize my men and load the ships." "You have one," Jaehaerys said. "The tide." He wasn't actually sure about the tide, but the captain didn't challenge it, which suggested either the man knew the tide, and it was indeed against them, or he decided that 2 hours versus 1 hour wasn't worth arguing about with someone who had a dragon. 1 hour and 12 minutes later, 6 Lannister ships were clearing the harbor. Jaehaerys watched them go from the topmost tower, the one that faced west, the tallest point of Dragonstone, from which on a clear day you could see the faint brown smudge of the mainland. He could see it now barely at the edge of vision. The Crownlands, the Blackwater, King's Landing, somewhere beyond sight but absolutely present. "That went better than expected," Tyrion said, arriving behind him with a cup of wine he'd found somewhere in the castle's stores. The Lannisters apparently believed in keeping their garrisons well supplied in at least one respect. "Did you expect it to go poorly?" "I expected it to be messier. Men don't usually march out of castles because someone asks them to." He sipped the wine, made a face. "They usually need more convincing." "They needed to understand the situation clearly," Jaehaerys said. "Most people do the right thing when they understand the situation clearly. They do the wrong thing when they're confused, or afraid, or loyal to something that isn't worth their loyalty and don't know how to say so." He paused. He didn't want to die for Cersei on a volcanic island. He just needed a path that made the not dying feel like a professional decision rather than a failure. Tyrion was doing the calculating look again. Jaehaerys was beginning to find it almost affectionate, the way one finds a recurring weather pattern affectionate. It wasn't aimed at him, exactly. It was just Tyrion's way of processing the world. "You know," Tyrion said, "I'm beginning to revise my theory about what you are." "You had a theory." "I have theories about everything. It's a survival strategy." He looked out at the departing ships. "I came to Valyria expecting to find a boy being raised as a weapon, an instrument of Daenerys' ambition, shaped and pointed at the throne. You told me this. I know. What I didn't tell you is what I'm revising it to." He looked at Jaehaerys directly. "You're not a weapon. You're something harder to categorize. You think like a king, Not like a man who wants to be king, but like someone for whom ruling is just the most obvious solution to a series of obvious problems. He paused. That's either very good or very dangerous. Probably both, Jaehaerys said. Probably both, Tyrion agreed. Daenerys arrived 3 hours later, Drogon descending on Dragonstone's beach with considerably more dramatic presence than Hagar's courtyard landing, which was saying something. She walked through the castle's main entrance with the particular quality of movement that she'd had for as long as Jaehaerys could remember. Not hurried, not slow, just purposeful, like someone who knew that the room was arranged around wherever they happened to be standing. She stopped in the great hall, looking up at the dragon carvings on the columns. The Targaryen iconography worked into every surface, and for a moment she was very still. Jaehaerys watched her from the gallery above. He'd read enough of her history, she'd told him enough of it, piece by piece over the years, the way you tell difficult things to people you trust, to understand what this room cost her to stand in. She'd never been here before. This was the first soil of Westeros she'd ever touched. Then she breathed, and the stillness passed, and she was moving again. "I want the ravens out tonight," she said, to the room in general, which at this point contained Tyrion, 2 of Dragonstone's resident stewards who had stayed out of a combination of castle loyalty and apparent total indifference to who was in charge, and Jaehaerys. House Stark, House Martell, House Tully, the ones in the Riverland still fighting, and to the wall. "To Jon Snow?" Jaehaerys asked from the gallery. She looked up at him. "To Castle Black," she said. "We'll see who answers." The ravens went out that night. The next morning, Jaehaerys was in the castle's training yard at dawn, and that was where he met Davos Seaworth. The man had sailed in alone, in a battered fishing boat that had absolutely no business making the crossing from the mainland, and he'd beached it on the eastern shore in the middle of the night. The 2 remaining garrison soldiers, who had, it turned out, been happy to stay on as staff under new management since they'd never had any strong opinions about which Targaryens or Lannisters they worked for, had found him in the morning and brought him in. Not under arrest, exactly, but not with full freedom either, until someone decided what to do with him. What Jaehaerys made of him in the first 30 seconds was this: a man past 50, weathered in the way that seafaring people are weathered, with honest eyes and the hands of someone who had worked with them his whole life. He had no sword. He had a letter. "You came from Castle Black," Jaehaerys said. It wasn't a question, the man's gear, the direction he'd sailed from, the timing relative to the ravens. "I came from Winterfell," Davos said. His voice was careful, southern originally, though years had blurred it. He was looking at Jaehaerys the way Tyrion had looked at the ruins of Valyria from the air. "The ravens from Castle Black were forwarded south. Jon," he stopped, chose the name carefully. "Jon Snow is at Winterfell. He's retaken it from the Boltons. He's called the King in the North." "King in the North," Jaehaerys said. "The Northern Lords named him," Davos said, and there was something in his voice, loyalty, and with it gentle warning, the way someone warns you about something they care about. "He didn't ask for it." "I know." Jaehaerys was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about him." Davos seemed surprised by that. He'd clearly prepared for a different kind of conversation, the political one, the claim and counterclaim one that lords had been having for 300 years. "What do you want to know?" "What kind of man is he?" Davos looked at him for a long moment. Then something settled in the old sailor's face, a decision to simply tell the truth, which Jaehaerys recognized as one of the rarest decisions a person made in political contexts. "He's stubborn," Davos said. "Stubborn in a way that is infuriating when it's pointed at you and reassuring when it's pointed at your enemies. He died, I told you that already, the letter said it. He died at Castle Black and the Red Priestess brought him back, and when he came back he paused. Different, not wrong. Not broken, but quieter somehow, like something had burned out of him and what was left was cleaner." Jaehaerys nodded slowly. He knows about the Night King. He's been fighting the dead for 2 years. He was at Hardhome. Davos's voice dropped slightly. He watched the Night King raise the dead from the sea. He'd seen things that most men in the South think are stories. His eyes met Jaehaerys's. He came south to get help. Dragonglass, dragons, the armies to stop what's coming. He paused. He would have come here himself, but the northern lords won't let him leave. After the Battle of the Bastards there, protective, Jaehaerys supplied. Paranoid, more like. They think if he goes south he doesn't come back. Davos looked at him with the careful honesty of a man delivering a complicated package. He sent me instead. He wanted someone here in person, not just ravens. To assess us, Jaehaerys said. Davos didn't deny it. He doesn't know what you are. He knows a Targaryen is at Dragonstone with dragons. He knows about the prophecy. Melisandre has been in his ear about Azor Ahai and the prince that was promised for 2 years. He doesn't much care for prophecy. He does care about the dead and dragonglass and anything that might actually stop them. He looked at Jaehaerys with a directness that was almost startling in its simplicity. He's not your enemy. He's not a rival. He's a man trying to stop the end of the world, and he'd shake hands with anyone who could help him do it. Jaehaerys was quiet for a long moment. The dragonglass mines under this island, he said. They're significant. The deposits are deeper than the Lannisters knew. We found the geological surveys in the castle records last night. He looked at Davos. Tell Jon Snow he can have as much dragonglass as he can carry, and tell him, he paused. Tell him his nephew wants to meet him. Davos went very still. Something moved across his face that was not shock exactly, but the very rapid reorganization of a worldview. He looked at Jaehaerys, looked at him properly, the way you look at something when you're finally allowing yourself to see it rather than what you expected. The dark hair, the stark gray eyes, the Targaryen something underneath it all in the jaw and the quality of the stillness. Your Grace, Davos said quietly. Just Jaehaerys, he said. I'm not asking for bowing and titles from a man who came across the Blackwater Bay in a fishing boat in the middle of the night because someone needed to. Those are the kind of people I'd rather just talk to. Davos looked at him for another long moment. Then he nodded with the weight of a decision being made. He'll come, he said. When I tell him he'll come. Good, Jaehaerys turned. We'll have food sent to you, rest. The ride was long. He paused, one foot on the stair back up to the gallery. Davos. The Red Priestess. Melisandre, she's at Winterfell. She was, I don't, he hesitated. I have complicated feelings about her. I'll want to hear them, Jaehaerys said. Later. He found Daenerys in the map room, which had become her natural habitat within about 3 hours of taking the castle. She'd found the war table almost immediately, and within an hour had recarved its surface markings with the updated information Tyrion and Davos had brought, pressing the changes into the existing grooves with a heated blade with the focus of a craftsman. She was good at that, at taking what existed and making it serve a new purpose. It was one of the things Valyria had taught them both. Davos Seaworth, she said without looking up. Jon Snow's man. Jon Snow's man, he confirmed. He came with an offer of alliance and a request for dragonglass. The mines, she nodded. I've already had men start the survey. He'll come south himself, Jon. She did look up then. When Davos reports back, a week, maybe 2. Jaehaerys came to the table looking at the carved map. All the little markers, armies, ships, disputed territories. The complexity of a continent that had been at war with itself for decades, laid out in miniature. We need to talk about Cersei. We do. She knows we're here by now. Sir Aldrich and those 6 ships would have reached Blackwater Bay last night at the latest. She knows we have Dragonstone. She knows we have 3 dragons. She knows. He stopped. She knows about me. Daenerys was quiet. She knows Rhaegar had a son, he said. She's known for years, presumably. That's not new information. What's new is that the son is here at Dragonstone and he's not alone. She'll send someone, Daenerys said. Not an army, not yet. She'll send someone to look, to talk, possibly. She'll want to understand what she's dealing with before she commits to open war. Or she'll send assassins. Those two, both, probably simultaneously. She tapped the map at King's Landing. Cersei Lannister is not stupid. She'll do what she always does when faced with something she can't immediately destroy. She'll try to understand it first, probe for weaknesses, and then destroy it. The probing phase is the dangerous one. Jaehaerys nodded. Then we use it. He looked at the map. While she's trying to understand us, we're building. Lords in the Reach who hated the Tyrells but hate the Lannisters more. The Dornish who have every reason in the world to support a Targaryen heir. The Northern Alliance, Jon Snow brings that. He traced the roots on the map with his finger. We don't need every lord. We need enough that attacking us costs more than accommodating us. And the Night King, that's the argument that wins everyone who can be won. He looked up at her. People die for kings, people die against armies, but people fight harder than they've ever fought in their lives when the alternative is the end of all life. He paused. We need someone to have seen it, someone the lords will believe. Jon Snow. Jon Snow, he agreed. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the map. Then she said, "You're thinking very like a king." Tyrion said that too. Tyrion is perceptive. She looked at him. Just remember that thinking like a king and being one aren't the same thing. The difference is whether the decisions you make are for yourself or for the people you're deciding for, he said. You've told me this. I'll keep telling you until you don't need me to. You've always told me things until I didn't need you to, he said. At some point you're going to have to accept that I've been paying attention. Something crossed her face, warmth, and with it, the particular mix of pride and grief that he'd been watching her navigate his whole life. The pride of having raised something good. The grief of watching it become independent. She covered it quickly, the way she covered most things, with purpose and forward motion. Tonight, she said, we write the message to the Dornish, and tomorrow I want to look at the dragonglass mines myself. She turned back to the map. And Jaehaerys, yes. When Jon Snow comes, she paused. Be careful, not because I distrust him, because you're going to want to trust him immediately, and wanting something doesn't make it safe. She met his eyes. Family is the easiest thing to feel certain about and the hardest thing to actually know. He understood what she was saying. He also understood the layer beneath what she was saying. The complicated thing about what it meant for both of them, that there was another Targaryen, alive, with a claim, with people who loved him. The question of what that changed. I know, he said. He wasn't sure she believed him. He wasn't entirely sure he believed himself. That night, after the ravens had gone out and Davos had eaten and slept, and the castle had settled into the particular quiet of a place recently occupied, and not yet fully inhabited, Jaehaerys went to the battlements that faced north. Drogon was circling somewhere high above, a black shape occasionally visible against the stars. Jaehaerys was on the beach, half in the water, which she'd been doing since they landed. Apparently she found it pleasant, the cold Westerosi ocean, a contrast to the volcanic warmth she'd grown up around. Regal was on the rocks to the east. He could see the mainland. At night, at this angle, you could see lights, fishing villages on the shore, the occasional larger glow of a town. People living their lives within sight of Dragonstone, unaware that everything had changed, or not yet aware, or aware and waiting to see what it meant. He thought about what Tyrion had said. You're not a story, you're a fact. He thought about Jon Snow, alive again somewhere in the north, fighting a war against death itself while the South argued about succession. He thought about what Davos had said. He didn't ask for it. The king in the north who hadn't wanted to be king. He wondered what that felt like, to have something pressed on you by the love of people around you. He'd never had that. He'd had something different, the slow, deliberate preparation for a role that had been decided before he was born, handed to him not by a crowd of cheering lords but by a woman in a burning city who'd looked at a prophecy and a baby and made a decision. He didn't resent it. He wanted to be clear about that, at least to himself. He didn't resent Daenerys for any of it, not the preparation, not the weight of it, not the years in the ruins. She'd given him everything she had. She'd built him something real. He just didn't want to be only what she'd built. The sea moved below him, dark and cold and nothing at all like the smoking sea. No sulfur here, no volcanic warmth, just salt and depth and the slow, incontestable movement of something enormous that had never particularly cared what the people on its shores thought about it. He found, to his surprise, that he liked it. Below him, Jaehaerys lifted her head from the water and looked up at him. He could feel it, not mystically, not through some magical bond, just through years of proximity, the same way you know when a person you've spent years with is looking at you even when you can't see them. He looked back down at her. "Tomorrow," he said to her and to himself and to the dark continent that was not yet within reach but was closer than it had ever been. "We start tomorrow." She put her head back in the water. Jaehaerys stood on the battlements of his ancestral home, under a sky full of stars, on the threshold of everything that came next, and was not afraid. Chapter 3. The king in the north, Jon Snow, arrived on a gray morning, 3 weeks after Davos sailed south. Jaehaerys was on the beach when the ships came around the headland, 2 longships, northern-made, the kind built for cold water and hard weather rather than speed or ceremony. No banners flying, no heralds, just ships moving with the efficient purpose of people who had somewhere to be and hadn't much patience for the theater of arrival. He'd known they were coming since dawn, when the lookout on the eastern tower had spotted them rounding the cape. He'd told Daenerys, who'd said she needed an hour to finish the correspondence with Dorne, which meant she'd be there in 40 minutes. He'd told Tyrion, who'd said he needed wine first, and had then materialized on the beach before Jaehaerys, which suggested the wine had been very quick. They stood together on the black sand as the longships came in, Jaehaerys with his arms at his sides, Longclaw at his hip, Tyrion with his cup, which he'd apparently decided was load-bearing. Davos was somewhere on one of those ships. He'd sailed back north 10 days ago, carrying the message and the promise of dragonglass, and the information about who Jaehaerys was that he'd carry like a complicated gift all the way to Winterfell. The first ship beached. Men came over the side, northern soldiers in gray and brown practical gear, no polish. 20 of them, spreading out along the beach with the automatic positioning of people who spent a lot of time protecting someone. And then Jon Snow came over the side of the ship and walked across the black sand toward them, and Jaehaerys understood immediately what Davos had been trying to tell him. He'd expected something. He hadn't been sure what, something that looked more like himself, maybe, the Targaryen blood showing the way it showed in the mirror every morning. Or something that looked completely foreign, a Stark to the bone, nothing familiar in it at all. Instead, what he got was Jon Snow, who was neither of those things and both of them at once. Dark-haired, gray-eyed, with Lyanna's jaw and Rhaegar's brow, and a quality of movement that was entirely his own, learned from 20 years of a life that had nothing to do with Valyrian ruins or dragon riding. He moved like a soldier, like someone who had been in enough real fights that his body had reorganized itself around the knowledge. He was looking at Jaehaerys with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, assessing, questioning, and underneath both of those, something more careful, more vulnerable, the expression of someone looking at a thing they'd been told about and finding that the reality is more complicated than the telling. They stopped 4 feet apart. The northern soldiers had gone still. Tyrion was very carefully not saying anything, which was its own kind of effort. "Jon Snow," Jaehaerys said. "Jaehaerys Targaryen," Jon said. His voice was lower than Jaehaerys expected, rougher. He looked at Jaehaerys for another long moment. Davos said. He stopped, started again. He said you called yourself my nephew. You're my father's brother, Jaehaerys said. That makes you my uncle, technically. Something shifted in Jon's face, not quite a smile, but the preparatory movement of one quickly controlled. You don't look like anyone's nephew. You don't look like anyone's uncle. The almost smile made another attempt. This time it got slightly further before retreating. No, Jon said. I suppose not. He looked at Jaehaerys with the honest, comprehensive attention of a man who had survived enough to know the value of seeing clearly. I don't know what to do with this, he said. Just said it flatly, without apology. I've had 3 weeks to think about it and I still don't know. You don't have to do anything with it, Jaehaerys said. You just have to work with me. Everything else can wait. Jon considered him. Davos said you're 16, 16 and a half, and you flew here on a dragon. I flew here on a dragon. Jon looked at the 3 dragons currently distributed around Dragonstone, Jaehaerys on the beach 50 yards south, Regal on the eastern rocks as usual, Drogon circling high above. His eyes moved to Regal and stayed there for a moment. Something crossed his face that Jaehaerys couldn't fully read. That one, Jon said, nodding toward Regal. He keeps looking at me. He's named for your brother, Jaehaerys said. My father, he may know something we don't. The pause this time was longer. Jon looked at Regal, who had lifted his head from the rocks and was, in fact, watching Jon with the particular focused attention that dragons usually reserved for things they decided to care about. Then Jon looked back at Jaehaerys, and whatever had been uncertain in his expression settled into something more decided. Right, Jon said. Show me these dragonglass mines. Tyrion exhaled. Wonderful, he said, to no one in particular. We're all alive. The mines were deeper than anyone had expected, and richer. They'd spent the first week after taking Dragonstone with torches and ropes, mapping the tunnels that ran beneath the island's volcanic rock, and what they'd found had rewritten every estimate Tyrion had made about the island's strategic value. There was enough dragonglass in those tunnels to arm 10,000 men, if you could get it out and work it into weapons in time. If. Jaehaerys took Jon through the upper tunnels himself, with torches, while Tyrion stayed above and Davos ate the first decent meal he'd had in 3 weeks. The two of them moved through the narrow passages in the comfortable silence of people who had both spent time in underground spaces. Jon in the crypts of Winterfell, Jaehaerys in the sealed vaults of Valyrian ruins, and Jaehaerys let the tunnels speak for themselves, holding his torch to expose the walls where the black glass caught the light and glittered like frozen fire. Jon crouched and ran his hand along a seam in the rock wall where the dragonglass ran in a vein 3 inches wide. This goes deeper. He asked, much deeper. The main deposit is 3 levels down. We haven't fully mapped it yet. Jaehaerys held the torch higher. How many men do you have who can work stone? Not enough. Jon stood. I'll send for them. There are builders in the north, men who have been cutting rock since before the wall was built. He paused. How long will it take to produce enough weapons to matter? Depends on your definition of matter. 100 weapons by the end of the month if we work the tunnels in shifts. 1,000 by winter. Jaehaerys paused. If we have until winter. We might not. Jon said it without dramatics, just the flat honesty of someone reporting weather conditions. The Night King was at Hardhome 14 months ago. The last report from the ranger patrols beyond the wall, what's left of them, put the army of the dead 2 days north of Eastwatch. He looked at Jaehaerys in the torchlight. 2 days in autumn. In winter March, with no need to rest or eat, they could be at the wall in weeks. The silence in the tunnel was very complete. The wall will hold, Jaehaerys said. The wall is ice and old magic, Jon said. The Night King is something that predates both. He paused. I've looked him in the eye. Across the water at Hardhome, while he raised my dead from the sea and sent them back at us. He looked at me. Another pause. Something went through Jon's face briefly. That was not fear exactly, but was the emotional memory of it, turned into something harder by the time it showed. He looked at me like I was a problem he'd already worked out how to solve. "Then we change the problem," Jaehaerys said. Jon looked at him. "You're very confident for someone who's never seen a white." "I'm confident because I've been preparing for this since before I could ride," Jaehaerys said. "Not defensive, just factual. I've been in Valyrian ruins where something dead was moving in the dark. Not the same as the Night King's army, I know. But I know what it is to fight something that doesn't stop. And I know what fire does to things that shouldn't be moving." Jon was quiet for a moment. "Fire kills them," he confirmed. "Dragonglass through the heart, Valyrian steel, and dragonfire if you have it. I have it. I know." Jon looked at the dragonglass walls around them. "The question is getting it north before." He stopped. "There's something else, something I need to tell you and Daenerys together." He paused. "It's not small." "Then we'll hear it together," Jaehaerys said. "Tonight." They came back up from the tunnels into gray afternoon light, and Jon stopped on the path above the entrance and looked out over the sea for a moment. The wind had picked up, cold and direct from the north, and it moved through his dark hair with the easy familiarity of something that had known him a long time. "Lyanna Stark was my mother," Jon said, not a question, just saying it in the tunnel's aftermath like something he'd been building up to. "Yes," Jaehaerys said. "Your mother too." He said it carefully, factually, testing the shape of it. "Yes. And Rhaegar Targaryen, my father, your brother." Jaehaerys paused. "Half-brother, technically." "Aerys was Rhaegar's father, not yours." Jon was quiet. "Ned Stark raised me," he said. "He told everyone I was his bastard. He stopped. "He never told me the truth. He died without telling me." The flatness in his voice wasn't bitterness exactly, it was the particular kind of pain that had been processed into acceptance and then into something harder still. "Davos found out from a maester at the Citadel. A young one. He found records, a marriage record." He looked at Jaehaerys. "Rhaegar annulled his marriage to Elia Martell and married Lyanna in a secret ceremony at the Tower in Dorne, which makes me legitimate," Jaehaerys said. "Legitimate," Jon agreed, and the word sat between them with the full weight of what it meant politically, dynastically, historically. Jaehaerys looked at him. "Does it change what you want?" Jon returned the look. "I'm the king in the north. I didn't ask for it, and I've spent half my tenure trying to convince my lords that the bigger problem is north of the wall, not south of it." He paused. "What do you think I want?" "I think you want the same thing I want," Jaehaerys said. "To stop the dead, everything else is secondary." "Yes." Jon said it simply, and for the first time something in his expression fully unclenched. "Yes, exactly that." "Then we agree on the most important thing," Jaehaerys said. "The rest we can argue about after." "Can we?" "We're family," Jaehaerys said. "Arguing is mandatory." This time the almost smile made it all the way. It changed Jon's face entirely. Something younger in it. Something that looked like the person he might have been if the world had arranged itself differently. It was brief, but it was there. The evening meal in Dragonstone's great hall was the first real gathering they'd had since landing, Daenerys at the head of the table, Jon across from her, Jaehaerys to her right, Tyrion to her left, Davos beside Jon, and a handful of Jon's senior men at the far end. The hall was still cold, still not fully occupied, still carrying the hollow feeling of a place recently vacated. But there was fire in the hearth and food on the table, and the particular charged atmosphere of a room full of people who understood that what was said in the next few hours might determine everything. Daenerys and Jon had met that afternoon briefly in the map room. Jaehaerys hadn't been there, had deliberately not been there, because some introductions were best managed without an audience. He'd assessed both of them afterward from their expressions. Daenerys carefully composed, which meant she was thinking hard, Jon slightly off balance, which meant she'd said something unexpected. Both of them more interested in each other than they'd anticipated. He'd filed that away and not commented. Now over food, Jon told them what he'd told Jaehaerys he needed to say. "Bran," he said. "Ned Stark's youngest son. He survived the sack of Winterfell. He went north beyond the wall. He found the three-eyed raven, or what was left of him. He looked at the table. Bran can see, not just now, past and present, and sometimes what's coming. He saw the Night King's creation. He saw the first men who returned. He paused. He says the wall will fall, not soon, not tonight, but it will fall, and when it does, the Night King's army walks south and everything below it dies. He looked up. Unless someone kills the Night King. Silence. Can he be killed? Daenerys asked. He was made, Jon said, by the children of the forest to fight the first men. They put a dragonglass blade through his heart and turned him into what he is, which means he has a heart. Which means he can have it stopped, Jaehaerys said. Bran thinks so, he's not certain. He says the magic that made him also protects him, that you'd have to reach him directly, get past his army, past the White Walkers who serve him. He paused. And Bran says this is the part that matters. He says the Night King isn't heading south blind. He's heading south because he felt something. A change, something that drew him. His eyes moved to Jaehaerys. He says the Night King knows about the dragons, that he's building toward something specific. Toward us, Daenerys said. Toward the dragons, Jon corrected. He wants them dead, undead, under his control. He looked at Daenerys. A dead dragon would be the wall, she said. Jon nodded. The wall is held by ancient magic tied to the first compact between men and the children of the forest. Bran says an undead dragon, the fire of a creature that was never meant to be dead, turned to the Night King's cold, could break the magic, could bring the wall down. The fire in the hearth crackled. Nobody spoke for a moment. Well, Tyrion said into the silence with the tone of a man who has decided that levity is a survival strategy. That's significantly worse than I thought. It usually is, Davos said, with the resigned acceptance of a man who had stopped being surprised by how bad things could get. Then we don't let him have them, Jaehaerys said. He said it with the same simplicity he said most things, not dismissing the scale of the problem, just declining to be paralyzed by it. He has to come south for the dragons. We go north for him. We find a way to end him before he gets close enough to try. Going north with dragons into his territory, Jon started. Is dangerous. Jaehaerys agreed. What's the alternative? Wait here for him to come to us with an army of 1,000,000 dead and make his attempt from a position of strength. He looked at Jon. You said you looked him in the eye at Hardhome. What did you see? Jon thought about that. Intelligence, he said finally. Real intelligence. Not like a man, but like something that has been thinking about one thing for 10,000 years and has become very good at thinking about it. Then he'll expect hesitation, Jaehaerys said. He'll expect us to consolidate in the south, build alliances, wait until we're strong. He won't expect us to bring the fight north. Daenerys was watching him with the expression she used when she was deciding whether to agree. Not convinced yet, but not dismissing it either. If we go north, she said, we leave the south to Cersei. Cersei is a human problem, Jaehaerys said. The Night King is an existential one. Cersei can be managed. The dead can't be negotiated with. She won't see it that way, Tyrion said. She'll use any absence to strengthen her position, forge alliances, get the Iron Bank behind her permanently. He paused. She's already been in contact with Euron Greyjoy. She wants his fleet. Then we need to be faster than both of them, Jaehaerys said. Jon had been watching this exchange, watching Jaehaerys specifically, with an expression that had evolved steadily through the meal from careful distance to something closer to recognition. You're not what I expected, he said now directly. I've been getting that a lot, Jaehaerys said. What did you expect? Daenerys asked Jon with the mild, dangerous interest of someone who genuinely wanted to know the answer. Jon considered. Honestly, I expected someone who'd been raised to rule. Someone polished and careful, and he searched for the word. Arranged, like every lord I've ever met who was trained for it from birth. He paused. You're not that. No, Daenerys said. He's not. She looked at Jaehaerys, and the expression she wore was the one he'd seen on the high ledge above Valyria, the open one, unguarded, the one she saved for moments that mattered. Valyria doesn't produce polished. She looked back at Jon. It produces real. After the meal, when Jon's men had settled in the lower hall and Tyrion had taken his wine to the library, and Davos had found what appeared to be a comfortable chair near the fire in the corridor and immediately fallen asleep in it, Jaehaerys and Jon ended up on the battlements above the northern face of the castle, looking out at the dark water. It had been, in some ways, inevitable. Two people finding themselves in the same story after having lived in entirely different ones. There was a gravity to it that pulled them toward the same space without requiring planning. They stood in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who were used to silence and found it more honest than forced conversation. "She loves you," Jon said eventually. "Not Daenerys," the weight of it pointed elsewhere. "Lyanna, your mother. You should know Ned Stark loved her more than anything. He kept your secret his whole life and went to his death rather than let Robert Baratheon find you." Jaehaerys was quiet for a moment. He'd known the facts of this. Daenerys had told him, piece by piece, what she knew. Robert's rebellion, Lyanna in the Tower of Joy, Ned finding her dying and making a promise. He knew the facts of it the way he knew the facts of the doom of Valyria, as history, important and shaping, but at a remove. This was different. This was someone who had grown up in Ned Stark's house, who had felt the weight of that secret from the inside without knowing what the secret was, who had watched a man carry a lie out of love for a dead sister and had loved that man without ever fully understanding the love he was witnessing. "What was she like?" Jaehaerys asked. He kept his voice level. "Just asking, just wanting to know," Jon considered. "I never knew her. She died before I was born, before you were born, or just after. What I know is what the Northerners remember." He paused. "They say she was fierce. Not kind fierce, but real fierce, like she saw the world exactly as it was and refused to pretend otherwise. She could ride and fight. She didn't wait to be rescued from anything. She chose Rhaegar." He looked at Jaehaerys. "Whatever the South says about the abduction, she chose him. I believe that. Ned believed that." "Daenerys believes that too," Jaehaerys said. "She says Rhaegar was." He stopped. He found he didn't entirely know how to talk about his father. He knew him only through what others had said, through the historical record, through Daenerys' careful and honest accounting of a man who had been her brother, and who she'd loved, and whose worst impulses she'd never pretended away. She says he was brilliant and careless in equal measure, that he could see far enough to understand the prophecy, and not far enough to understand what his understanding would cost. "Sounds like half the great men in history," Jon said. "The other half were just careless without the brilliant," Jaehaerys agreed. Jon made a sound that was almost a laugh. "You know you sound 40 years old. Daenerys always said I was born old. She probably wasn't wrong." Jon paused. "She raised you well. She raised me to survive, the being well part I had to figure out myself." He looked at the water. "She's been preparing for this, for Westeros, my whole life. Every lesson, every text, every choice about what I learned and how, all of it aimed at this." He paused. "I don't resent it. I want to be clear about that. She gave me everything she had, but I'm aware of what it is." "Being shaped for something," Jon said. "Yes." "I know what that's like," Jon said, differently. "The Night's Watch shaped me without asking permission. The Lord Commander role, the king in the north." He paused. "Being raised from the dead." He said it without drama, just as one item in a list. "None of it was chosen. All of it became mine anyway." He looked at Jaehaerys. "The difference between a burden and a purpose is mostly about which direction you're facing when you carry it." Jaehaerys looked at him. "Davos said you were stubborn. Davos is not wrong. He also said you were the right person to be fighting the dead." Jaehaerys paused. "He's not wrong about that either." Jon looked at him for a long moment. The northern night was settling over the sea, cold and clear. stars coming out with the sharp definition that clear air produced. "What do you want?" Jon asked. "Not the throne, not the prophecy. You personally. What do you want out of all this?" Jaehaerys thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. He didn't reach for the political answer or the dynastic answer or the easy answer about saving the world. He actually thought about it, standing on the battlements above the sea that he'd crossed 3 weeks ago and still felt was new. "I want to be what Rhaegar wasn't," he said finally. He saw the problem. The Night King, the prophecy, the song of ice and fire, he understood it. He organized his whole life around preparing for it. And then he let everything burn because he loved one person more than he loved his purpose. He paused. "I want to see the problem and solve it. I want the people who come after to live in a world that still exists." He looked at the stars. "That's enough. That's actually plenty." Jon was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than it had been all evening. "When I came back," he said, "after Melisandre brought me back, I lay there for a while before I told anyone I was awake. He stopped. Just lying there, feeling alive, feeling what alive meant after feeling the other thing. And I thought, I'm done with duty. I'm done with obligation. I'm done with being the responsible one." He paused. "Then I got up and the first thing Davos told me was that there was an army of the dead 2 days from the wall." "And you went back to work," Jaehaerys said. "I went back to work." Something in Jon's expression was rueful and warm and entirely resigned. "Turns out I can't stop caring, can't stop." He shook his head. "I don't know if that's virtue or just how I'm made." "Both," Jaehaerys said. "The same way with me." He paused. "We're going to get along fine." "I thought so," Jon said, with the quiet certainty of someone who had learned to trust his instincts on the things that mattered. "I thought so when Davos told me." He paused. "Your nephew, I liked that." "You should. It's accurate. I'm 7 years older than you." "That makes it funnier," Jaehaerys said. "And Jon Snow, king in the north, last surviving son of Ned Stark who had never been Ned Stark's son, laughed properly for what sounded like the first time in a long while. It was a good laugh, genuine and low and surprised by itself. The next morning, Daenerys called them all to the map room at first light, and what she laid out on the war table was not a plan so much as a sequence of forced choices, the kind of strategic thinking that Jaehaerys recognized from her best moments, where she stripped the problem down to its moving parts and showed you that some of the things you thought were choices were actually inevitabilities waiting for you to catch up. "Cersei is moving," she said. "A raven came in overnight from our contact in the Reach. She's offered Randyll Tarly command of the Lannister armies in exchange for House Tarly's full allegiance. That pulls the Reach south of Highgarden toward her." She looked at the table. "Your own Greyjoy is sailing for King's Landing with a fleet. She's going to be significantly better defended within the month." "Then we move before the month," Jaehaerys said. "That's part of it." She looked at Jon. "I need the North formally allied, not just you and me in a room agreeing to cooperate. I need a formal declaration, House Stark, or whatever form of that still stands, publicly supporting the Targaryen claim in exchange for our support against the Night King." Jon's jaw tightened slightly. "My lords won't like it." "Your lords declared you king in the North," she said. "They'll follow your lead if you give it to them clearly. Some of them." "Enough of them," she said. "I'm not asking for their love, I'm asking for their swords pointed the right direction." She looked at him steadily. "I know what I'm asking. I'm asking you to spend political capital you'd rather save. I'm telling you there won't be any political capital left if the Night King walks south." Jon was quiet, looking at the map. Jaehaerys watched him, watched the internal process, the weighing, the familiar expression of a man who had made hard decisions often enough that he no longer pretended they were anything else. "I'll send ravens to Winterfell," Jon said. "I want to talk to Sansa first. She's holding the North while I'm gone. She needs to be part of the decision." "Of course," Daenerys said, And the dragon glass, Jon said. I want ships loaded and heading north by the end of the week, whatever we can get out of the mines by then. Done, Jaehaerys said. And I want to, Jon stopped. He was looking at Regal again, who had moved from the eastern rocks to the courtyard outside the map room's window sometime in the night, and was now sitting there in the early morning light with the patient attention of someone who had been waiting. I want to. He stopped again. Try, Jaehaerys said. Jon looked at him. Just go outside and try, Jaehaerys said. He's been watching you since you got here. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, nothing is lost. Neither had I, Jaehaerys said. The first time, you just do it. Jon looked at Regal through the window for a long moment. Then he looked at Daenerys, who was watching him with an expression that was both thoughtful and, underneath the thoughtfulness, quietly moved by something she was choosing not to name. All right, Jon said. He sounded like a man agreeing to walk into a fight he wasn't certain about, which was, Jaehaerys supposed, accurate. He went outside. Jaehaerys and Daenerys watched from the window. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no great moment of revelation, no roar of dragonfire or mythic bonding in a blaze of prophecy fulfilled. Jon walked out into the courtyard and stopped 10 feet from Regal, and Regal lowered his head until it was level with Jon's chest, and they looked at each other for a long time. Then Jon reached out and put his hand against the side of Regal's face. The dragon made a sound, low, resonant, like something settling into place, and closed his eyes. Daenerys made a small sound beside Jaehaerys. He glanced at her. Her face was turned away slightly, but he could see the line of her jaw, and it was doing the thing it did when she was feeling something she hadn't planned to feel. He's Rhaegar's son, she said quietly. Not to Jaehaerys, really. To herself, or to the absent shape of things that had happened long ago and could not be undone and had led, through blood and fire and ice and time, to a man and a dragon standing in a courtyard in the morning light. He is, Jaehaerys said. She was quiet for a moment more. Then she straightened and her expression returned to its working configuration, focused, purposeful, aimed at the problem. We send the ravens to Dorne today, she said. I want Ellaria Sand's response before we make any further commitment south. Agreed. He paused. Daenerys, she looked at him. Thank you, he said, for telling me about him, about Rhaegar. Honestly, I mean, not the hero's version. She held his gaze. He was your father. You deserve to know who he was. Most people would have given me the hero's version. Most people, she said, don't care enough to give you the true one. She looked back out the window at Jon and Regal. The truth is harder and it's worth more. That's the first thing Valyria taught me. Outside, Jon had moved around to Regal's side, and the dragon had turned his head to track him, those great green-gold eyes following his movement with the total attention that a dragon gave to something it had decided to claim. Jon said something, too quiet to hear through the window. Regal's tail moved, a long, slow sweep across the courtyard stones. Jaehaerys watched his uncle and his father's dragon and felt, in his chest, something that he didn't entirely have words for. Not sentimentality. He'd been raised in ruins, and ruins had a way of burning sentimentality out of you very efficiently. Something more solid than that, more structural, like the feeling when a piece of Valyrian text he'd been puzzling over for weeks finally resolved into meaning, the click of things aligning, pieces finding their fit. This was what it looked like when the prophecy stopped being a story and started being a fact. He turned away from the window. He had work to do. The dragonglass ships loaded over 4 days, steady work, organized by Davos with the efficient competence of a man who had been moving cargo under difficult conditions his entire adult life. Jon's northern soldiers worked alongside the small staff they'd assembled at Dragonstone, and Tyrion managed the logistics from a central position he'd established in the Great Hall, surrounded by manifests and counting boards, and the wine that he genuinely seemed to process into strategic clarity rather than impairment. On the 4th evening, as the last of the first shipment was being sealed in oilskin, and loaded into the holds of the two northern longships. A rider arrived at the castle gate. Not from the north, from the south, from King's Landing. He was alone, unarmed, ostentatiously, both hands visible, no sword, traveling under a white flag that was so specifically clean it looked like it had never been used before. He was young, well-dressed in a way that had been slightly undone by hard riding, and he carried a sealed letter with the royal seal of the Iron Throne pressed in red wax. Jaehaerys took the letter from the gate captain who brought it up. He looked at the seal, broke it. Inside, in a hand that was precise and controlled and gave nothing away in its penmanship, were 12 lines. He read them once, then he read them again. Then he handed the letter to Tyrion, who read it with the expression of a man who has been expecting exactly this and is not pleased about having been right. "What does it say?" Jon asked from across the hall. "Cersei Lannister," Tyrion said, setting the letter on the table, "requests a meeting, neutral ground, 3 days from now. She wants to discuss," he paused, selecting the words from the letter carefully, "the terms of a mutual accommodation." He looked up. "She says she's not interested in war. She's interested in knowing what she's dealing with," Jaehaerys said. "Yes," Tyrion paused. "She also says, and I'm quoting, 'The boy who calls himself heir should come alone. Queens are above such meetings. The king may speak for his queen.'" He looked at Jaehaerys. "She's trying to establish the hierarchy before the meeting has happened." "Let her," Jaehaerys said. He looked at the royal seal on the letter, the golden lion, pressed into red wax. He thought about what Daenerys had said about Cersei, she'll probe for weaknesses. He thought about what Tyrion had told him on the crossing, in the many hours of conversation about the woman who had been his sister, his enemy, his family, and his damage all at once. She doesn't fear what she understands. She fears what she can't categorize. "Tell the rider I'll be there," Jaehaerys said. "Jaehaerys," Tyrion's voice was careful. "She will try to. I know what she'll try," Jaehaerys said. "That's why I'm going." He looked at the letter one more time, then set it down on the table beside Tyrion's hand. "She wants to know what I am. I want her to know what I am. Those two things can happen in the same meeting." Jon was watching him from across the table with the expression he'd come to recognize over 4 days, the look that was equal parts respect and something that might have been the emotion you feel when you see someone younger than you carrying something heavy and doing it well. "Don't let her see anything she can use," Jon said quietly. "She won't see anything I don't intend to show her," Jaehaerys said. He looked at the window, at the darkening water beyond. "Tell Daenerys," he paused. "She'll want to argue about it. Let her argue. Then tell her I'm going anyway." Tyrion looked at the ceiling. "I am going to need much more wine," he said, but he reached for the parchment to write the reply. Chapter 4. The Lion's Teeth. The meeting place was a fishing village called Duskendale, half a day's ride up the coast from King's Landing, close enough that Cersei could reach it with a small escort in a morning, far enough from the capital that neither party was standing in the other's stronghold. It had been a prosperous town once. The war had taken most of the prosperity and left the bones of it behind, empty docks, a market square with half its stalls collapsed, people who moved with the careful economy of those who had learned that drawing attention was dangerous. Jaehaerys rode in on a gray horse from the castle's stable, alone. He'd promised Daenerys a 2-man escort and then not taken it, which was going to be a conversation he'd have later. The village had cleared, word had come ahead, apparently, Cersei's outriders making sure the locals understood that whatever was happening today was not something they needed to witness. The streets were empty. The windows shuttered. He rode to the center of the market square and stopped and waited. They came 10 minutes later, a column of 12 horsemen in Lannister crimson, no banner flying but the armor doing the work instead, gold details catching the pale autumn sun. They arranged themselves with practiced precision, 6 on each side of a gap in the middle, and through that gap came a single horse carrying Cersei Lannister. He'd seen her portrait in the historical records Tyrion had brought, painted versions, formal, the kind of image a queen commissioned to project power rather than truth. What he actually saw was different in the way that portraits of powerful people were always different, the truth beneath the projection. She was a beautiful woman in her 40s, dressed in black and dark red with no concession to the chill, with green eyes that catalogued everything they touched with the speed and thoroughness of someone who had been reading rooms since childhood. She rode well. She carried herself with the absolute certainty of a person who had spent so long being the most dangerous presence in any room that it had become structural, just part of how she moved through space. She looked at Jaehaerys, and her face gave away exactly nothing. He gave away exactly nothing back. They dismounted, she first, then he, neither of them waiting for the other's permission, and walked to the center of the square where a table had been set up. Stone, not wood, nobody's furniture, one chair on each side. Cersei sat with the ease of someone who owned chairs. Jaehaerys sat with the ease of someone who didn't need them. She studied him for a moment without speaking. He let her. He understood what was happening. She was doing the cataloging, the rapid assessment that Tyrion had told him about. She reads people the way some people read books. The difference is she reads people to find the margins where they can be written in. "You're younger than I expected," she said finally. Her voice was warm in a way that had nothing to do with warmth, the same voice, he imagined, that she used to greet people she'd already decided to destroy. "You're exactly what I expected," he said. Something moved in her expression. Not offense, she was past offense as a functional response. Something more like recalibration. "Tyrion taught you to fence," she said. "Tyrion taught me about you. I did the fencing myself. My brother has a gift for characterizing people." She paused. "What did he tell you?" "That you're the most intelligent person in Westeros when you're not being the most self-destructive one." She was quiet for a moment. Then a smile appeared, the real kind, brief and involuntary, surprised out of her the way his grin was sometimes surprised out of him. It vanished almost immediately, but it had been there. "He's not wrong," she said. "He's rarely wrong about me. It's his other judgments that are problematic. Like coming to find us. Like every decision he's made since birth." But there was something beneath the dismissal, old grief, old love, old damage, that she covered quickly. "Let's not waste each other's time with family sentiment. You're here because you want to know if I'll fight you. I'm here because I want to know if you're worth fighting." "And?" She looked at him. The cataloging continued, not hostile, simply thorough. She was looking at his hands, his posture, the sword at his hip, the way he sat in the chair, looking for the thing that would tell her what he was. "You rode here alone," she said. "Yes. You have 3 dragons and an army's worth of dragonglass and the king in the north eating dinner at your table, and you rode to this meeting alone." "Yes." "Why?" "Because an escort tells you I think you're a threat," he said. "And I don't." The temperature in the square dropped by approximately 3 degrees that had nothing to do with the weather. Cersei looked at him with something that had moved past cataloging into something sharper. Not anger, something more precise than anger. The expression of a craftsman encountering a piece of work they hadn't expected to find competent. "That's either very confident or very foolish," she said. "It's honest," he said. "You're dangerous to people who need things from you. People who need your alliance, your approval, your mercy. People who are afraid of what you can take away." He met her eyes. "I don't need anything from you, and I'm not afraid of what you can take away." "Which makes this meeting simple." "Nothing is simple," Cersei said. "This is," he said. "You can fight us or you cannot fight us. Fighting us costs you everything. Not fighting us costs you the current arrangement, which is already unstable because you've destroyed everyone who made it stable." He paused. "I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to tell you clearly what's true so that you make the right decision for the right reasons." She was very still for a moment. It was the kind of stillness that, in animals, preceded rapid movement. You burned the Sept of Baelor, he said. You destroyed the Tyrells. You've alienated the Reach, the Riverlands, and 2/3 of the Stormlands. Your alliance with Euron Greyjoy is a liability dressed as an asset. He's not loyal, he's ambitious, and ambitious men without loyalty are only useful until they find something better to be ambitious toward. He said all of this without heat, without judgment, just stating the shape of the situation. You're holding the throne with Lannister soldiers and borrowed time. I'm not your most urgent problem. Cersei leaned forward just slightly and her voice dropped. No, she said. What's your most urgent problem? The dead walking south from beyond the wall. She didn't laugh. He'd half expected her to laugh, and the fact that she didn't told him something important, she'd heard this before, from someone she'd considered credible enough to not dismiss. My son Joffrey, she stopped, started differently. I've had reports from the Night's Watch for 3 years. I chose to disbelieve them because they were inconvenient and because the Night's Watch has a vested interest in making the rest of Westeros believe they're necessary. She paused. Then I had a report from Qyburn. He has methods of information gathering that the Citadel considers unorthodox. He says the dead are real. They're real, Jaehaerys said. She looked at the table. For a moment, just a moment, the absolute composure shifted, and he saw beneath it. Not fear. Something she found more uncomfortable than fear. Uncertainty. Cersei Lannister had organized her entire existence around the ability to predict and control the people and forces around her. The dead didn't negotiate. The dead didn't have ambitions she could redirect or loyalties she could purchase. The dead were a category of problem her entire life's education had left her unprepared for. What do you want? She asked, not with the sharp tone of the opening volleys. This was the real question, asked because she decided he was worth asking it too. I want Westeros intact when the dead reach the wall, he said. I want to be able to put dragons and armies north without worrying about a Lannister knife in the south. I want you to stop spending resources fighting something that will be irrelevant if the Night King wins. He paused. I want a ceasefire, not an alliance, not your allegiance, just a ceasefire. Stop moving against us. Give us the South, give us the support of the neutral houses you still influence. Let us fight the war that actually matters. And in exchange, when the Night King is dead, when the war in the north is over, we negotiate the southern question, peacefully, with all parties alive to negotiate. She studied him. You're asking me to stop consolidating power when I'm in the middle of consolidating it, for the benefit of an enemy I haven't seen. I'm asking you to prioritize correctly, he said. Yes. And if I don't, he looked at her steadily, then you'll have made the wrong choice for understandable reasons and I'll regret it. You'll regret it, she repeated, with a precision that suggested she was examining each word. Not, she stopped. You're not going to threaten me. Threatening you would require me to want something from this conversation other than the truth, he said. I don't. You either understand the situation clearly or you don't. I can't make you. The silence stretched. One of her guards shifted, armor clinking softly in the cold air. She didn't look at the guard. You're not what Rhaegar was, she said finally. He would have given me a speech about destiny. Rhaegar isn't here, Jaehaerys said. Something moved across her face that was complicated, grief and contempt and memory all threaded through each other in a way that had clearly been sitting there for a long time. No, he isn't. She looked at Jaehaerys with an expression he couldn't fully read, which was the first time in the conversation that he couldn't. He would have been proud of you, I think, in the useless, poetic way that men like him are proud of things. She paused. I mean that as a genuine observation, not a compliment. I'll take it as both, Jaehaerys said. They looked at each other for a long moment. The sun had moved while they'd been talking, the shadows in the square shifting, the light going from pale gold to the gray of coming afternoon. I'll consider your terms, she said finally. It wasn't agreement and both of them knew it. But it wasn't refusal either, and that was the point. He stood, she stood. They did not shake hands. That would have been a false intimacy neither of them needed. She looked at him one last time with those green, analytical eyes, and he looked back. And then she turned and walked back to her horse with the absolute self-possession of someone who had not been rattled, even though she had been, slightly, and both of them knew that too. He rode back to Dragonstone in the cold afternoon and found Daenerys waiting on the beach. He could tell from her posture, arms crossed, weight slightly forward, the stillness of a person who has been waiting longer than is comfortable, that the argument was coming regardless of what he reported. He dismounted and walked to her and said preemptively, "She didn't have us killed." "You went alone," she said, not loudly, quietly, which was worse. "I went alone because you decided your judgment superseded the agreement we made," she said, "which was an agreement made between two people, not a suggestion from me and a courtesy acknowledgement from you." He held her gaze. "An escort would have told her I thought she was dangerous. She is dangerous. I know, that's not the relevant factor." He kept his voice level. "The relevant factor is what she thinks of me. If I walk in with 2 guards, she reads me as cautious, and cautious she can work with. If I walk in alone, she has to reckon with what that means." He paused. "It worked. She's considering the terms." "She's considering the terms because she wants time," Daenerys said. "Considering is what people say when they want to appear reasonable while they figure out how to undermine you." "Maybe." He looked at her. "But she's not moving on us immediately, which means Tyrion was right. Euron's fleet isn't ready yet, the Lannister army isn't consolidated yet, and she needs weeks before she can act decisively. Those are weeks we use." Daenerys was quiet, looking at him with the expression he knew meant she was deciding something. Not about the meeting, she'd already formed her views on the meeting. About him. About this moment specifically, which was the first time they had been genuinely, substantively at odds about a significant decision. "You didn't tell me you were going alone," she said. "I knew you'd say number, so you made the choice and told me afterward." She paused. "That's not how we do this." "No," he said, "it's not. I'm sorry for that part." He meant it not performatively but actually. He'd made a unilateral decision about something that was supposed to be a shared undertaking, and the apologetic part was real, even if the decision itself he'd make again. But not for the decision itself. It was right. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she exhaled, a long, controlled breath that was clearly doing several things at once. "Tell me what she said," she said finally. "Everything," he told her. They walked from the beach into the castle as he talked, and by the time they reached the map room, Tyrion and Jon were already there. Jon had apparently been told by one of the lookouts that Jaehaerys was back, and he told it again, the full conversation as accurately as he could remember it. Tyrion listened with the focused quality of someone processing strategic intelligence. Jon listened the way he listened to everything, completely, without interrupting, the whole of his attention in the room. When Jaehaerys finished, Tyrion said, "She's afraid." "She doesn't show it," Jaehaerys said. "Number, but the fact that she's considering at all means she is." Tyrion turned his cup in his hands. "Cersei doesn't consider things she's confident she can destroy. The fact that she didn't immediately reject the terms means she's done the calculation and found it uncertain." He paused. "Which means she's going to try something else." "Assassins," Jon said. Everyone looked at him. He shrugged. "It's what I do. If I couldn't win a direct confrontation and I needed time, reduce the other side's options while I built my position." He looked at Jaehaerys. "You're the piece she can't replace." "She can't reach the dragons," Daenerys said. "She doesn't need the dragons," Jon said. "She needs him." He nodded at Jaehaerys. "You're what makes this coalition hold together. The heir, the prophecy, the claim, remove that and the lords who are watching Dragonstone trying to decide which way to fall." He paused. "They fall toward familiarity, toward what they know, toward Cersei." Jaehaerys looked at him. "Then we don't give her the opening." "And we don't ignore the possibility," Daenerys said. She was looking at him with the expression she wore when she was making a decision she didn't expect him to like. Doubled guards on the castle, no more solo rides, and she paused. We move. We stop waiting for her to respond. We take the initiative before she does. The Reach, Jaehaerys said. House Tyrell is gone, Tyrion said. But Olenna Tyrell's bannermen aren't. House Tarly has gone to Cersei, but House Fossaway, House Merryweather, the smaller lords, they're unattached, they're angry, and they're looking for a reason to move. He paused. The right word from the right people would bring the Reach's remaining strength to us. And Dorne? Jon asked. Dorne is complicated, Daenerys said. Ellaria Sand's response came this morning. She went to the table and picked up the letter that had been sitting there, weighted by a stone. She'll ally, but she wants something specific in return. She paused. She wants Cersei delivered to her. The room was quiet. Alive or dead, she doesn't specify, Daenerys continued. But she wants her, it's the price of Dornish soldiers. Jon's expression was carefully neutral. And we don't deal in people as currency, Jaehaerys said flatly. Cersei answers for what she's done, but she answers to justice, not to a vendetta. He looked at Daenerys. Tell Ellaria we'll guarantee her justice and Dornish autonomy and the end of Lannister interference in Dorne. If that's not enough, we fight without them. Tyrion was looking at him with the calculating expression. That will cost us Dornish soldiers. Probably not, Jaehaerys said. Ellaria wants Cersei dealt with. She wants Lannister power ended. If we can credibly promise both, the specific method is negotiable. He paused. People want outcomes. They put conditions on them because they don't trust vague promises. Give her a specific enough promise about the outcome and she'll be flexible about the method. Daenerys looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the letter and began writing the reply. And Jaehaerys understood that was agreement. They ate late that night, all of them, around the great hall's fire. The food simple but hot. The conversation moving between strategy and something more personal. The way conversations did when people had been working together long enough to start being real with each other. Tyrion talked about his time in Essos with the particular mix of self-deprecating honesty and obvious intelligence that Jaehaerys was coming to recognize as his natural register. Davos told a story about smuggling onions into a besieged castle that was somehow both heroic and ridiculous. Jon was quiet in the way that meant he was comfortable rather than closed. Daenerys sat at the end of the table and watched all of them with an expression that Jaehaerys caught only once, briefly, when she didn't know he was looking. Something open and warm and slightly wondering. The expression of someone who had spent a very long time alone in a burning city and found themselves, without quite planning it, in a room full of people worth trusting. He looked away before she noticed him noticing. The attack came 3 days later. Not through the front gate, not through the harbor, not through any of the approaches that the doubled guards were watching. It came through the old sea caves beneath the castle's eastern face, passages that Jaehaerys had found in the castle's records the first week, and that Tyrion had noted as a potential vulnerability, and that had been added to the watch list but not yet properly sealed, because the stonework required was still being organized. Jaehaerys was awake because he was often awake at this hour, the deep middle of the night, the hour between second sleep and dawn that he'd spent in Valyrian ruins learning that darkness was just darkness, and that the things in it were finite. He'd been reading in his chambers, a Westerosi military history he'd found in the castle library, when the sound reached him. Not loud. That was the thing about professional assassins. They were defined by the sounds they didn't make. What he heard was a single misplaced footfall on the stone corridor outside his door, the slight drag of leather on rock that meant someone was moving more carefully than natural movement required. He was off the bed and at the door in 3 seconds, longclaw in hand. He opened the door, 4 of them in the corridor. Professional, he could see it immediately in the way they were positioned. 2 at the front to engage, 1 at the back to prevent retreat, 1 pressed against the wall to come in from the side once the front engagement drew his focus. Good spacing. Someone had thought carefully about this. He didn't give them the engagement they'd planned for. He went through the door into them while they were still registering that the door was open, taking the first man with the shoulder before he could set his feet, driving him back into the second, creating a brief knot of bodies that disrupted the formation. The man against the wall got his blade up in time to avoid Longclaw, but not in time to avoid the elbow that put him into the opposite wall. Jaehaerys was already past him, turning, putting his back to the wall that the fourth man had been positioned against, which meant the corridor's geometry had changed, and they no longer had the angles they'd planned on. The 2 front men came at him together, and here was where Corvo's lessons about fighting multiples earned their place. He didn't try to fight both simultaneously. He worked the space between them, kept them moving so that they were always slightly in each other's way, made the corridor's narrowness work for him rather than against him. The Valyrian steel was doing things to the fight that ordinary steel wouldn't, lighter than it looked, and the edge held in ways that meant every contact with the opponent's weapons damaged their blades rather than his. The fight lasted approximately 45 seconds. When it ended, 3 men were on the floor and the fourth was pressed against the wall with Longclaw at his throat. Jaehaerys looked at him. The man was young, younger than expected, maybe 20, with the lean build of someone trained specifically for this kind of work, rather than general soldiering. His eyes were doing the thing that eyes did when the body had accepted that it was probably about to stop, the last frantic calculation of the cornered. "Who sent you?" Jaehaerys said. Not a question. The man's jaw set. "I know who sent you," Jaehaerys said. "I'm asking because I want to know specifically how this was arranged, who the contact was when the commission was given, what the terms were." "That's information Cersei doesn't know I have, and it's information that changes the next conversation I have with her." He paused. "Help me get it." The man looked at him, processing the fact that he was still alive, processing what was being asked, processing the particular strangeness of being given a reason instead of an ultimatum. "There were more of us," the man said, rough voice, northern accent under it, the sound of someone from the Vale originally. 6 came through the caves, 2 went the other direction. Jaehaerys moved before the man finished the sentence. Not running, no panic, just immediate, purposeful movement down the corridor toward Daenerys' chambers, taking the fastest route and moving fast enough that he was at her door in 30 seconds. He didn't knock. He opened the door, and the 2 men who had been moving toward her bed turned and found him in the doorway. And the remaining 30 seconds of that particular problem concluded the way all Valyrian steel arguments tend to conclude. Daenerys was on her feet with a knife in her hand. She slept with a knife the way most people slept with blankets, automatically and without thinking about it. She looked at the 2 men on the floor of her chamber and then at Jaehaerys, and her face went through 3 expressions in very rapid succession: relief, controlled anger, and then the focused calm that she defaulted to when action was needed and processing would have to wait. "The rest?" she asked. 4 in the corridor outside my room, 1 talking. He looked at her. "You're all right. I'm fine." She was already moving toward the door, pulling a robe over her nightclothes with one hand and keeping the knife with the other. "Wake Tyrion. Wake Jon." "Already done," said Jon's voice from the corridor, which suggested Jon Snow had heard the fight and was already present, sword out, with 2 of his northern guards behind him. They reconvened in the corridor, and Jaehaerys' captive was still where he'd left him, which said something about the man's self-preservation instincts. And under the combined weight of Jaehaerys' question, Tyrion's more elaborate questioning methods, and Jon's particular quality of patient, unhurried expectation. The story came out. Cersei had not waited. She'd commissioned the attack before the meeting, before she'd even sent the letter requesting it, using a faceless man contact she'd maintained since before the war. Not the faceless men themselves, who were prohibitively expensive for this kind of operation, but trained associates who used their methods. The contact in King's Landing had organized it within 3 days of Dragonstone's fall. The sea caves were intelligence from someone who had served in the Dragonstone garrison, one of the soldiers who'd sailed away under Sir Aldrich's command and apparently found their way to a Lannister handler afterward. "She met with me in good faith," Jaehaerys said when the account was done. Not betrayal in his voice, just recalibration. "She met with you while simultaneously hedging her bets," Tyrion said. He paused. "That's actually exactly what I should have predicted. I apologize." "She's not going to give us the ceasefire," Jon said. "No," Jaehaerys said. He was quiet for a moment. The corridor smelled of blood and cold stone. The castle had woken around them, guards everywhere now, torches lit, the particular restless alertness of a place that had been attacked and was deciding what to do about it. Which makes the decision simpler. "You want to move on King's Landing," Daenerys said. She said it carefully, not as an objection, just as a statement of what she heard him thinking. "Not yet." He looked at the map on the wall of the corridor. There was one there, a simple one, just coastline and major towns. "She's shown us what she won't do. She won't give us peace. Which means every day we wait is a day she's working the problem. Euron's fleet, the Iron Bank, the undecided lords." He paused. "We need the reach. We need it now, not in 2 weeks, and we need Dorne." He looked at Tyrion. "Can we move both at once?" "If you're willing to split the dragons," Tyrion said slowly. "Yes." Jaehaerys looked at Daenerys. Daenerys was looking at him with an expression that was doing several things at once, assessing the strategy, processing the night's events, and underneath both of those, something that was running the calculation she'd been avoiding. About the assassins, about how close they'd come, about the fact that he'd gotten to her chamber before they had. "You came to my room first," she said. "I said the rest." She looked at him. "You left an active threat in the corridor and came to my room first." He held her gaze. "Yes." The silence was brief and complete. Jon looked at the ceiling. Davos, who had materialized at the edge of the group at some point, studied his boots. Tyrion looked at his cup, which was unfortunately empty. "You sealed the sea caves," she said finally. "They'll be done by morning," he said. She nodded. That was the end of that conversation, as far as anyone present could tell. But Jaehaerys saw, as she turned away to speak to Jon about the guard rotations, that her hand was not entirely steady, and he understood, not for the first time, but more clearly than before, that the unshakable quality she wore was not the absence of feeling. It was the decision to not let feeling become vulnerability. Valyria had taught him the same lesson. He suspected it was not a lesson either of them had entirely mastered. In the morning, the captive assassin was given a horse and a message. Not a message in writing, a message to deliver verbally to whomever in King's Landing received it. Jaehaerys gave it to him in the courtyard while the man stood waiting to find out if he was leaving alive. "Tell whoever sent you," Jaehaerys said, "that this attempt was noted, that I understand why it was made, and that the next time someone is sent through those caves, I'll send back what's left of them along with a raven confirming that every house in Westeros knows exactly who commissioned the job." He paused. "And tell them that the window for the ceasefire is now closed, not because I'm angry. Because we've moved past the point where that solution is available." The man nodded. He looked at Jaehaerys with an expression that had started the night as professional blankness and had moved through several intermediate stages into something that looked almost like reluctant regard. He rode. Jaehaerys watched him go. Behind him, Jaehaerys dropped from the upper battlements and landed in the courtyard, and he reached back without looking and put his hand against her neck, and she made the low, settling sound and pressed into his palm. "Right," he said to her, "to the castle, to the morning. Let's get to work." The next 10 days moved fast. Jon sent ravens north and received responses from Winterfell. Sansa's voice in the letters, sharp and thorough and entirely unwilling to be managed, which Jon read with the expression of someone who found a person they loved both admirable and exhausting. She agreed to the alliance, on terms that were practical and fair, and included 3 specific protections for northern autonomy that were so well crafted that Tyrion read them and said, "Someone up there is very good at this." "Sansa," Jon said. "She should be running the Iron Throne," Tyrion said. "Tell her that," Jon said, "and she'll assume you want something." The Reach Lords responded. Not all of them. 4 of the 8 they'd contacted didn't answer or sent equivocating non-answers that Tyrion categorized as waiting to see which way the wind blows. But House Fossaway came in clean, with 4,000 soldiers and control of the Mander River crossings, and 2 smaller lords followed within a day of each other, which was the political equivalent of jumping on a moving cart and hoping it was going the right direction. Dorne came. Ellaria Sand's second letter arrived 4 days after Daenerys' reply, and it was shorter than the first, a single paragraph confirming the alliance and the terms and adding, at the end, almost as an afterthought, "The young dragon speaks plainly. We find that admirable in Targaryens, who have not historically been plain. Jaehaerys read that twice and found it quietly amusing. Euron Greyjoy's fleet reached King's Landing on the 8th day. They knew because Tyrion's network in the city sent a raven, and because the fleet was large enough to be visible from the eastern watchtower of Dragonstone on a clear day, which this happened to be. Jaehaerys stood on the tower and watched the distant sails with the specific quality of attention he gave to problems that had just become more concrete. 40 ships, the lookout said. 52, Jaehaerys said. He had better eyes than the lookout. It was not a point of pride, just a fact. 52 ships against 3 dragons, Tyrion said from somewhere below. 52 ships don't fly, Jaehaerys said. It's not a symmetrical problem. No, Tyrion agreed. But 52 ships can blockade a harbor, intercept supply lines, cut off coastal allies from reinforcement. He paused. Euron Greyjoy is not a fool. He's many catastrophically unpleasant things, but not a fool. He knows what his fleet can and can't do against dragons. He's going to use it where they can't reach. Where can't dragons reach? Jon asked. Anywhere he moves fast enough, Tyrion said. Anywhere below decks. Anywhere there are people on his ships that he knows we won't burn. He'll use people as shields, Jon said. He'll use people as shields, Tyrion confirmed. Jaehaerys looked at the distant sails for another moment. Then he turned from the tower and walked back down toward the castle's main hall, and his expression on the way down was not the expression of someone confronting an insurmountable problem. It was the expression of someone who had moved on from the previous problem and was already thinking about the next one. On the 10th night, he sat alone in the highest room of the Dragonspire, not the same as the one in Valyria, but similar enough in structure that it had become his by default, the place where the window faced north and the wind came through the gap in the stone, and the world was visible in a way it wasn't from lower down. He thought about Cersei. Not with anger. Anger was an emotion that required you to be surprised by people doing the thing they were always going to do, and he hadn't been surprised. He thought about her with the particular kind of attention you gave to an opponent who was genuinely capable, which was a different kind of attention from what most people thought of as respect. It was operational respect, the kind that said this is a real problem, not this is a wonderful person. She'd moved faster than he'd predicted. The assassination attempt before the meeting had even concluded. That was the move of someone who was not negotiating in good faith, but was using negotiation as a screen for another action entirely. It was intelligent. It was exactly the kind of layered thinking that made her dangerous. And it had failed not because he'd been clever enough to predict it, but because he'd been awake when most people weren't, and Corvo had been a good teacher. And the stone creatures in Valyrian ruins had spent years ensuring that he didn't have the luxury of being unprepared in the dark. She would try again. She would try differently. She was already trying, probably, in ways that wouldn't reveal themselves for days or weeks. Quiet pressure on undecided lords, messages to Euron about what he stood to gain, some arrangement with the Iron Bank that was designed to cut their supply lines before they could be established. He thought about what she'd said about Rhaegar. He would have been proud of you. He'd taken it as both compliment and observation, but he'd also taken it as something she hadn't intended, information about herself, about the complexity of her relationship with the Targaryens she'd lived alongside. She'd hated Rhaegar for what his choices had done to the realm. She'd also, in some way he couldn't fully map, respected him. And something in her, looking at Jaehaerys, had seen both things at once. That was useful. Not in a manipulative sense. He wasn't going to manufacture sentiment to use against her, but in the sense that understanding what someone actually felt about you was always better than guessing. He heard the door behind him, the careful step, the deliberate announcement of presence. "I thought you'd be up here," Daenerys said. "I usually am," he said. She came to stand beside him, and they looked north together, and it was not the smoking sea they were looking at, but it had some of the same quality, the sense of distance, of something beyond the visible horizon that was moving toward them whether or not they could see it yet. "Tyrion has a plan," she said, "for Euron's fleet." "So do I," he said. "Are they the same plan?" "Probably not. His involves more deception. Yours probably involves more fire." "Mine involves both," he said, "but mostly fire." She made a sound that was somewhere between amusement and acceptance. "Tell me in the morning. Tyrion will want to argue about it. He always does. He's usually right about the parts he argues about." "Yes," Jaehaerys said, "but he's wrong about the parts he doesn't argue about, and those are the parts that matter." She considered this. "That's almost exactly what he'd say about you." "Good," he said. "That means we're complementary." She was quiet for a moment. The wind moved through the gap in the stone, and neither of them flinched from it, though it was genuinely cold, the north already in the air, the season turning. "I've been thinking about what comes after," she said. "After the Night King. After all of it. After Cersei, after the war, after—" She paused. "After everything I've been preparing for since you were born." She looked at the horizon. "I've been aiming at this for so long that I'm not entirely sure who I am without the aim." He looked at her. "You're the woman who turned a dead city into a home," he said, "who raised a child in volcanic ruins and taught him everything that mattered, who built a network across 2 continents through will alone." He paused. "After everything, you're still that. Those things don't go away when the problem is solved." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "When did you get good at this?" "At what?" "At saying the right thing." "I learned from the best," he said. "Also, Valyria has a lot of long evenings and very little entertainment." She laughed, genuinely, briefly, the real laugh that she gave almost no one. It changed her face the same way Jon's laugh had changed his, the same way Jaehaerys imagined his own laugh changed his. Suddenly younger, suddenly lighter, a glimpse of the person underneath all the purpose. Below them, Jaehaerys moved on the beach. Drogon circled overhead. Rhaegal was somewhere east, probably watching the sea with the patient attention he'd been giving it since Jon arrived, as if he understood that what mattered was coming from that direction and wanted to be the first to know. Westeros was waiting. Cersei was moving. The dead were coming. Jaehaerys looked north and was ready. Chapter 5. What kings are made of? The Reach Lords arrived on a Tuesday, which Tyrion noted was historically a bad day for political meetings, and nobody asked him why he knew that. 3 banners came through the Dragonstone gates in the gray morning. House Fossaway's green apple, House Merryweather's yellow and black, and a smaller banner Jaehaerys didn't immediately recognize until Tyrion murmured, "House Crane, 1,200 soldiers and the best granaries in the Reach." He filed that away. Granaries mattered more than most lords understood, which was one of the reasons most lords lost their wars before they started them. The lords themselves were what he'd expected, and what Tyrion had warned him about. Men of the old school, shaped by generations of court politics, accustomed to reading the room before they committed to anything. Lord Fossaway was 60 and deliberate, with the bearing of someone who had survived 3 kings by the simple method of never overcommitting. Lord Merryweather was younger, hungrier, with the barely concealed energy of a man who had been waiting for an opportunity and thought he'd found one. Lord Crane was somewhere between them, pragmatic, dry, watching. They gathered in Dragonstone's great hall, and the hall was warmer than it had been 2 weeks ago, fires lit. The Targaryen banners that Daenerys had brought from Valyria hung from the walls, 3 heads and 3 wings. It looked like what it was, the seat of a serious contender. Daenerys sat at the head of the table, and she was in full effect, the composed authority, the measured voice, every word carrying the weight of someone who had been making decisions that cost lives since she was younger than any man in the room. Jon sat to her left, and his presence did something to the northern question that no amount of political explanation could have done as efficiently. Here was the king in the north, physically, at the Targaryen table, which was a statement that required no interpretation. Jaehaerys sat to her right and said almost nothing for the first hour. He watched. He watched the way Lord Fossaway tested every statement Daenerys made with a small follow-up question. Not hostile, just careful. The behavior of a man verifying that the person across from him was as competent as they appeared. He watched the way Merryweather leaned slightly toward the table whenever the conversation moved to resources and armies, the hunger surfacing. He watched Crane watching all of them. The conversation moved through the expected territory, what the alliance required, what it offered, the guarantees of land and autonomy, and the restoration of what Cersei had taken from them. Daenerys handled it well. She was precise about what she would give and clear about what she wouldn't, and the clarity was more persuasive than generosity would have been because it told these men that she understood what she had and what it was worth. Then Fossaway said, "The dragons." He said it the way men said things they'd been waiting to say for an hour. 3 dragons are formidable. 3 dragons change the military calculation entirely. But dragons have riders, and riders have, he paused. Dragons have been lost before. A war fought on Dragonback has historically been decided by whoever loses a dragon first. He was looking at Jaehaerys when he said it, not accusingly, assessing. Jaehaerys looked back at him. "You're asking if the dragons die in battle, does our claim die with them?" "I'm asking what your answer to that question is," Fossaway said. "The answer is that we don't fight battles we have to lose dragons in," Jaehaerys said. "A dragon in the field is not a siege weapon or a cavalry charge, it's a strategic condition. The enemy doesn't get to choose how it's used. We do." He paused. "Cersei's fleet is in Blackwater Bay. Euron Greyjoy is not going to engage 3 dragons in open water. He's going to try to make us engage him on terms he chooses. We won't." "And the Night King," Fossaway said, "the dead army in the north." "That's the question none of you have asked yet," Jaehaerys said, "but it's the most important one." He looked around the table at Fossaway, at Merryweather, at Crane, at all of them. "The Night King is real. The army of the dead is real. Jon Snow has fought them. I haven't yet, but I've spent my entire life preparing for the possibility." He looked at Fossaway directly. "This alliance is not just about the Iron Throne. It's about whether there's a living world on the other side of this winter. If you're joining us because you want a Targaryen queen rather than a Lannister one, you're solving the wrong problem. If you're joining us because you want to be on the side of the army that stops the dead, that's the right reason." The hall was quiet. Merryweather was looking at his hands. Crane was looking at Jaehaerys with an expression that had moved through skepticism into something more complicated. Fossaway was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My father's father fought in the War of the Five Kings. His father fought the Mad King. Before that, someone in my line fought every war Westeros had." He paused. Every single one of those men thought they were fighting the most important war there was. He looked at Jaehaerys. "How do I know this one is different?" "You don't," Jaehaerys said. "You decide whether you trust what Jon Snow saw at Hardhome, what the Night's Watch has been reporting for 3 years, what Bran Stark saw in his visions. You decide whether the convergence of all of that is too much to dismiss." He paused. "Or you wait and find out for yourself. But by the time the dead cross the neck, the decision will have been made for you." Fossaway looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Daenerys, and something passed between them, the old lord and the queen. That was a recognition of a particular kind of competence on both sides. He nodded, slowly, with the weight of a man who understood that he was committing to something serious, and was choosing to do it anyway. Merryweather immediately followed, which was what hunger for alignment always produced. Crane waited another moment, then inclined his head with the particular dry brevity of a man who had made his decision before the meeting started and was confirming it. After they left, sent to the castle's rooms with Tyrion managing the logistics of feeding and housing a small army of lords and their retinues, Daenerys and Jaehaerys stood in the great hall alone for a moment. "The granaries," she said. "I know. Crane controls the Mander approaches and 2 of the best harvest regions in the Reach. He's more important than Merryweather, and he let Merryweather speak more." She looked at the door they'd gone through. "He'll be the quiet one who matters." "I'll talk to him tonight," Jaehaerys said. Separately, she looked at him. "You'll be friendly." "I'll be honest," he said. "It's better. With Crane, yes, not with everyone." "I know who needs what kind of truth," he said. She studied him for a moment with the particular look that had evolved over the last 3 weeks, not the mentor evaluating exactly, but something less hierarchical, more lateral, the look you gave someone who was working beside you rather than beneath you. "I know," she said finally. "I know you do." The letter from the Citadel arrived that afternoon. It was addressed to Jaehaerys specifically, which was unusual. Their correspondence generally came through Tyrion's network or addressed to Daenerys formally. The seal was a Meister's chain, which Davos confirmed was legitimate, and inside was 2 pages of dense text from a young Meister named Samwell Tarly, who wrote with the compressed urgency of a man who had a great deal to say and wasn't sure how much time he had to say it. Jaehaerys read it standing in the corridor, and then read it again, and then went to find Jon. He found him on the beach with Regal. Jon had been spending time with the dragon every day, not riding yet, just proximity, the long, slow process of mutual understanding. Regal had progressed from watching Jon to following him to occasionally pressing his head against Jon's shoulder with the deliberate, careful affection of something very large that was aware of its own size. It was, Jaehaerys thought, one of the more honest things he'd seen since coming to Westeros. He handed Jon the letter without preamble. Jon read it. His expression moved through several stages that Jaehaerys tracked. Recognition at the author's name, Sam. He said quietly once and then continued reading, then something that tightened in his jaw, then a stillness that was the opposite of calm. "He's at the Citadel," Jon said. "He's been there for months. He's been reading." He paused. "He found something." "The records," Jaehaerys said. "About the Long Night, the first one." Jon looked up. "The last time the Night King walked south," Jaehaerys said. "The hero who stopped him, Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised, whatever name you give him, he didn't kill the Night King with a weapon. Or not only with a weapon." He paused. Sam found the original texts, Valyrian, Old Valyrian, the kind that most Meisters can't fully read. He translated them with help from an older Meister who died 2 days after they finished. He let that sit for a moment. The Night King can't be killed while the army that powers him exists. The dead fuel him. They're not just his soldiers, they're his life force. Kill enough of them and he weakens. Kill the White Walkers who command the dead and he weakens further. But to end him completely, you have to destroy the source, Jon said slowly. There's a place, Jaehaerys said, north of the wall, far north. Sam calls it the Night Fort in the texts, but the Valyrian name is different, something older. It's where the first long night ended, where the original compact was made between men and the children of the forest. Sam thinks it's where the Night King goes when he's not moving south, where Jaehaerys paused, choosing the word carefully, where he rests, where he's most powerful and most vulnerable because the magic there is the original magic, the first binding. Jon was very still. If we could reach it, the army of the dead is between here and there, Jaehaerys said. 1,000,000 whites and however many White Walkers, all of them pointed south. We'd have to go through them, or around them, Jaehaerys said. North of the army, from a different direction, from the sea. Jon looked at him. From the shivering sea. Eastwatch is the easternmost point of the wall. From Eastwatch you can sail east along the northern coast past the army's flank. They'll follow if they see you, they'll move to cut you off, but if you move fast enough with dragons covering the approach. It's insane, Jon said. It's geometrically sound, Jaehaerys said. Those are not the same thing. No, Jaehaerys agreed. But it's the plan that gives us the shortest path to ending this permanently, instead of fighting the dead 100 at a time for the next 10 years. Jon looked at the letter again, then at Regal, who had been listening to this entire conversation with the focused interest he gave to everything involving Jon, his large head tilted slightly to one side, then back at Jaehaerys. You want to do this, Jon said, not accusatory, recognizing something. I've been wanting to do this my whole life, Jaehaerys said. That's not the same as it being reckless. I've been thinking about the Night King since I was old enough to understand what he was. This is the plan that makes sense. What does Daenerys say? I haven't told her yet. Jon raised his eyebrows. I'm telling you first because you've actually seen them, Jaehaerys said. You know what we're talking about in a way I don't yet. If you think the plan is wrong, not risky, wrong, then I want to know before I take it to her. Jon was quiet for a long moment. Regal pushed his head gently against Jon's shoulder, and Jon reached up without looking and put his hand against the dragon's jaw, and the gesture was so automatic that it was clear he'd stopped thinking of it as remarkable. It's not wrong, Jon said. It's the right direction. The execution, he paused. Getting through the night in the shivering sea with the dead on the shore and the Night King at the end of it. I know, Jaehaerys said. People will die, Jon said. Not in the abstract. People he stopped. People who trust us. People die in every plan, Jaehaerys said. The question is whether they die for something that ends the problem or something that manages it. He met Jon's eyes. The dead don't get tired. The dead don't run out of food or morale or reasons to keep going. We do. Every season we fight them and don't end them, we lose more than them. We lose faster. Jon looked at him for a long, assessing moment. You know, he said, you remind me of myself sometimes. And then you say something that's completely nothing like me at all. Is that good? I'm not sure yet, Jon said. Ask me after. After what? After we've done the impossible thing and survived it. They told Daenerys that evening. Jaehaerys had thought carefully about how to do it, not strategically, not in the political sense, but in the specific sense of how you told the person who had raised you from infancy, who had spent 16 years building you for a purpose, that the purpose had taken a specific shape that she hadn't fully planned for, and that it required walking directly into the most dangerous place in the known world. He didn't find a particularly good method. He told her directly, which was the only way he knew how to tell her things. She listened. The whole way through. She didn't interrupt, which was its own kind of answer. When Daenerys interrupted, it meant she was reacting emotionally and the reaction was winning over the analysis. When she didn't interrupt, it meant she was doing the analysis first and the reaction was waiting its turn. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sam Tarly, Randall Tarly's son. The Maester at the Citadel, yes. Randall Tarly who went to Cersei," she said. "His son is not his father," Jon said. She looked at Jon. "No," she said, "you'd know that better than most." A pause. "The texts Sam found, you've seen them yourself." "They're in the letter," Jaehaerys said. Sam translated the key passages. She looked at the letter again, running through it a second time with the precise attention she gave to documents she was actually weighing. He could see her working through it, the Valyrian text that Sam had included in transliteration, the passages about the first long night, the location description that cross-referenced with 3 other sources Sam cited. "It could be fabricated," she said finally. "Not by Sam, but the sources. Old texts can be misread, misattributed." "It could be," Jaehaerys said. "But it cross-matches with things in the Valyrian archives we found in the ruins. The references to the original compact, the northern location. I've seen versions of those descriptions before. Different language, same geography." She looked at him. "You didn't tell me that." "I'm telling you now. Jaehaerys," her voice was careful. "If there are relevant records in the Valyrian archives that bear on the Night King, there are things I read over 16 years in a city full of burned texts that I haven't catalogued perfectly," he said. "This is one of the pieces that matched. I recognized it when I read Sam's letter." He paused. "I'm not hiding information. I'm connecting it in real time the same as you would." She held his gaze for a moment. Then something shifted, the small adjustment of someone who is holding tension and choosing to release it deliberately. "All right," she said. "The plan." She looked at the map on the table. "You can't go north with all 3 dragons. Euron's fleet is in the bay. If we leave Dragonstone unguarded, I take 2 dragons north," Jaehaerys said. "You stay south with Drogon, hold the Reach Lords in alliance, keep Cersei from moving. When the north is done, no," she said. He looked at her. "No," she said again. The word was clean and flat and had no argument in it because it wasn't an argument. It was a statement. "I go north, you stay south." The room was very still. Jon was sitting at the end of the table with the expression of a man who has decided that this particular conversation requires him to be furniture. "You go north," Jaehaerys said. "I go north with Jon. You have the Reach Alliance, you have Tyrion, you have the political groundwork that needs to be managed while we're in the field." She looked at him steadily. "You know the Lords. You've met Fossaway and Crane. They're going to need someone here while I'm Daenerys." He kept his voice level. "That's not why you want to go north." She met his eyes. "No," she said, "it's not. You want to go north because you think if I go, I don't come back." The silence this time was the particular silence of a true thing that has been said. "I think," she said carefully, "that the Night Fort is the most dangerous place in the known world and that sending you there." She stopped, started again. "I've been preparing you for this your whole life. I've taught you everything I know, and I'm aware," her jaw tightened slightly, "I'm aware that the thing I'm feeling right now is not strategic and I'm choosing not to pretend otherwise." Jaehaerys looked at her for a long moment. "You go north," he said. "Jon goes north, I stay south." He said it quietly without drama. "But not because I can't do the northern mission, and not because you need protecting. Because you're right that the political work here needs someone who isn't going to accidentally set fire to a lord's dignity and lose the alliance." He paused. "And because you've been preparing for the north your whole life too. I'm not the only one who was built for this." Something moved across her face, complex, layered, the expression of someone receiving something they needed and hadn't expected to receive with grace. "I'll have Rhaegal and Hagar," she said. "You'll have Drogon." "Drogon and I will get along," he said. "He likes people who don't flinch. He likes people who feed him," Jon said. from the end of the table, and both of them looked at him. And he looked back with the mild expression of a man who had very carefully not said anything for 10 minutes and felt he'd earned a contribution. The preparation for the northern expedition took 5 days. 5 days of supply loading, weapon preparation, battle planning that involved maps spread across every available surface in the castle and Tyrian moving markers, with the focused energy of a man who had found his purpose. Jon's northern soldiers being drilled in anti-white tactics by men who had actually fought whites. The dragonglass weapons being distributed with the specific efficiency of people who understood exactly what they were for. On the third day, Euron Grey made his move. Not the fleet, not directly. A smaller action, surgical, aimed at the Reach Lord's supply lines. 6 fast galleys appeared at the mouth of the Mander at dawn, intercepting the grain barges that House Crane had been directing south from the Reach's interior. By mid-morning, 4 barges were burning and 2 had been taken. By afternoon, the news had reached Dragonstone. Jaehaerys was in the training yard when Tyrion found him, and he was mid-drill and finished the combination before he stopped and took the report, which told Tyrion something he later said he'd already understood but now felt in his bones. Crane, Tyrion said. This is targeted at Crane specifically. Euron knows which supply lines matter, and he's hitting the one that most damages the Lord we most need to keep in place. Intelligence from King's Landing, Jaehaerys said. Someone in our camp is reporting what we have and who matters. Tyrion's expression confirmed this was his conclusion too. We have 40 people in this castle who weren't here 2 weeks ago, the Reach Lord's retinues, Davos's sailors, the garrison staff Jaehaerys said, possibly, or one of the garrison staff who stayed on, Jaehaerys said, Sir Aldrich's men. They chose to stay because it was convenient, not because they were committed. He was already moving, Tyrion half running to keep up. Which ones have had access to the logistics discussions? Tyrion thought as he walked. 2 of the kitchen staff would have been present when Crane's supply arrangements were discussed. There was a meeting in the main hall 3 days ago. Find them, Jaehaerys said. Quietly. I want them found before they know they've been identified. This took 4 hours and produced one person, a young man named Eddard, no relation, who had been a kitchen worker under the Lannister garrison, and who had apparently been passing information through a contact in a fishing village on the mainland coast, messages carried by the fishing boats that moved through Blackwater Bay with the invisibility of the completely ordinary. He was 17. He shook through the entire conversation with Jaehaerys, in the small room off the great hall where Tyrion had brought him, and he kept waiting for something that didn't come. I'm not going to hurt you, Jaehaerys said. He said it simply, not to reassure, just to state the fact so the boy could stop spending energy on fear and start spending it on something useful. I need to know everything you've passed along and when. Specifically the Crane supply information. When did you send it and by what route? The story came out quickly, as stories did when the teller had been frightened into complete cooperation. 3 messages total carried by fishing boat to a contact in a village called Dun Fort, from there presumably to King's Landing. The Crane intelligence had gone 2 days ago. The last message, Tyrion said. What else was in it? The boy looked at his hands. The northern expedition, he said quietly. I heard in the kitchen the morning you were discussing it. I heard the plan. The room was very quiet. Which parts? Jaehaerys said. That the Queen is going north with the King in the north. 2 dragons. That you're staying south. He looked up and his expression was miserable in the uncomplicated way of someone who has done a stupid thing for small money and only now understands the size of what they've done. I didn't know it mattered. I didn't understand what the north. Who recruited you? Tyrion asked. Sir Aldrich's steward before they sailed. He told me to stay on and watch and, all right, Jaehaerys said. He stood up. You're going to write down everything you've reported and the exact route it traveled. Then you're going to help us send a false message through that same route, information we want Cersei to have." The boy stared at him. "You're not being executed," Jaehaerys said. "You're being useful. Those are different outcomes, and you should prefer the second one." Tyrion looked at Jaehaerys over the boy's head with an expression that had moved past the calculating look entirely into something that was simpler and warmer, and didn't bother trying to categorize what it was seeing. The false message they constructed that evening was Tyrion's best work. It told Cersei's network that the northern expedition had been delayed by 2 weeks due to supply problems, that Daenerys had had a falling out with Jon Snow over the terms of the Northern Alliance, and that Jaehaerys was planning to sail to Dorne personally to shore up Valyria sans commitment. All of it specific enough to be credible, all of it wrong in the ways that mattered most. While this was being arranged, Jaehaerys found a moment with Crane. The old lord was in the chamber that had been assigned to him, looking out the window at the harbor with the expression of a man doing very calm mathematics about a very angry problem. He turned when Jaehaerys came in and waited. "4 barges, Jaehaerys said. 2 taken. I know what that costs you." "The barges themselves are replaceable," Crane said. He had a way of speaking that was entirely without decoration, every word doing its exact job and nothing else. "The signal it sends to my bannermen is less replaceable. There are 3 lords under my banner who were already uncertain about this alliance. Losing those barges is Euron telling them that I can't protect their resources. The Mander approaches will be covered by the time the sun goes down," Jaehaerys said. "I'm taking Drogon south along the river at dusk. Anything Euron has left near the mouth of the Mander will not be there by morning." Crane looked at him. "You're going yourself." "It's my mistake to fix," Jaehaerys said. "The intelligence failure happened in my castle." Something shifted in Crane's expression, the dry, measuring look giving way to something that was not warmth exactly but its functional equivalent. The recognition that the person across from him was accountable in a way that most people with dragons were not. "Your bannermen will hear about this," Crane said. "The speed of it." "That's the point," Jaehaerys said. Crane nodded. Once brief done, Jaehaerys went to the beach and woke Drogon. The dragon regarded him with one enormous amber eye, the eye of a creature that had been observing him for 3 weeks with the patient, comprehensive attention that Drogon gave to things he hadn't yet decided about. Drogon was Daenerys' dragon in the specific sense that Jaehaerys was Jaehaerys', bonded, particular, theirs. Riding another rider's dragon was something the Valyrian histories called difficult and sometimes fatal, and Jaehaerys had never attempted it because Jaehaerys had been sufficient, and there had never been a reason. There was a reason now. He walked to Drogon's head and stood in front of him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from the dark scales. Drogon's nostrils moved, taking in his scent, and underneath the scent, whatever it was that dragons read in Targaryens, the blood thing, the fire thing, the specific resonance that said kin in a language older than Valyrian. Drogon lowered his head. Jaehaerys put his hand against the side of his jaw, not the same as putting his hand on Jaehaerys, which was as automatic as breathing. This was deliberate, a gesture of introduction rather than familiarity. "I know," he said quietly to Drogon. "She trusts you with everything. That's why I need you to trust me with this." Drogon made a sound, low, resonant, the settling sound. The same sound Rhaegal had made when Jon touched him for the first time. Jaehaerys swung up. Drogon was larger than Jaehaerys, larger and faster, and with a temperament that was less like Jaehaerys' controlled power and more like something barely managed. The difference was immediate on launch, the speed of the climb startling even for someone who'd been riding since he was 6. He angled south along the coastline, low over the water, the narrow sea dark beneath them, the stars coming out overhead, and Drogon moved like he was made of the dark itself. Black against black, invisible except for the line of heat he trailed. They found Euron's fast galleys at the mouth of the Mander, anchored close together, the crews apparently settling in for the night under the assumption that their work was done, and the response, if any came, would be slower. It was not slower. What happened in the next 20 minutes was not a battle in any conventional sense. Battles required two sides with the means to contest each other. What happened at the mouth of the Mander was a demonstration, Drogon coming in from the sea, low and fast, and Jaehaerys letting him work with a freedom that was different from how he flew Jaehaerys. Jaehaerys was precise, controlled, a weapon in the hands of a marksman. Drogon was something more like weather, overwhelming, everywhere, the kind of thing that doesn't have a margin for negotiation. 3 galleys burned. The other 3 fled, making for Blackwater Bay and the safety of the larger fleet, which they reached and which very visibly rearranged itself as a result of whatever the surviving crews reported. The news reached Dragonstone before Jaehaerys did. He landed on the beach to find Crane's steward already there, along with 2 of his bannerman lords who had apparently ridden through the night from the mainland after hearing the message about the barges. They looked at Jaehaerys coming off Drogon in the pre-dawn dark, and they looked at the smoke rising to the south where the galleys had been, and they did the same kind of mathematics that men did when the calculation resolved into something clear and irrefutable. Both of them pledged their houses before sunrise. When Daenerys found him in the courtyard an hour later, the sun just coming up, Drogon having wandered to the beach, her expression was the composed one, but there was something underneath it that had to do with the fact that she'd watched the whole thing from the castle's eastern tower. "You could have taken Jaehaerys," she said. "Drogon was faster," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "He flew for you." "Yes, just like that." "It took about 30 seconds, he said. "He's reasonable once you're honest with him." She was quiet for a moment. "He's never let anyone but me fly him. He made an exception." He paused. "He knows I'm blood." Something moved across her face that was deep and complicated, and she covered it almost immediately, but he'd seen it, the thing that was pride and grief and love and the particular vertigo of watching everything you built become more than you built it to be. She turned and looked at the sea. "We leave tomorrow," she said. "Jon and I north." "I know." "Drogon," she stopped. "Keep him. While I'm gone." He looked at her. That was not a small thing. That was, in fact, the largest single gesture she could have made, handing him the dragon who was the center of her power, her protection, the creature she had loved longer and more completely than any person. "He'll be here when you come back," Jaehaerys said. She nodded, still looking at the sea. "Daenerys," he said. She turned. He crossed the courtyard and put his arms around her, the way he'd done on the high ledge in Valyria, deliberately, not automatically, because this was not the kind of affection either of them produced without intention. She was still for a moment, and then she held on, and he felt her exhale against his shoulder, a long, slow release of everything that had been held together through 3 weeks of politics and assassins and alliance building and preparation for a war that was finally about to become real. "Come back," he said, simple, unadorned. "I always come back," she said. He let her go. She straightened and the composure settled back into place, and she was the Dragon Queen again, ready, purposeful, aimed. She looked at him with an expression that was both of them at once. The woman who had raised him and the ruler she had made herself, looking at the thing she'd built and finding it equal to the thing that was coming. "Hold the south," she said. "The south will hold," he said. She walked away, back toward the castle, back toward the preparations for tomorrow's departure. Jaehaerys stood in the courtyard until she was through the doors, and then he stood there a moment longer, just holding the weight of it. Drogon padded up from the beach and pressed his enormous black head against Jaehaerys' shoulder. Jaehaerys put his hand against the warm scales without looking. "Right," he said to Drogon to the morning to the south that was his problem now. Let's see what Cersei does next. By midday, he found out. The Raven arrived from Tyrion's King's Landing contact at the same time as a Reach rider came through the gate with a message from House Fossaway. Jaehaerys read both simultaneously, standing in the great hall with Tyrion watching his face. Cersei had made an offer to the Iron Bank. Not a loan, a partnership. In exchange for financing her war against the Targaryens, she was offering the Iron Bank a stake in the crown's revenue for 20 years. It was a significant enough offer that the bank, which had been drifting toward her for 2 years, had apparently accepted it. The Fossaway message said something different. Lord Fossaway had learned, through channels he didn't specify, which Tyrion noted meant he had his own intelligence network, which was useful information, that Cersei had also been in contact with the Golden Company. 20,000 professional soldiers from Essos. She'd hired them. They were sailing. 20,000 soldiers, the Iron Bank's backing, Euron's fleet, and the Lannister army. Jaehaerys set both letters on the table. She moved faster than I thought, Tyrion said. She's afraid, Jaehaerys said. He said it the same way he'd said it to Fossaway about the dead, not with satisfaction, just as an accurate observation. She's afraid because she does understand what we are, and she's trying to build enough that understanding stops mattering. The Golden Company will land within 2 weeks, Tyrion said. Maybe less, depending on the wind. He paused. If they reach the Crownlands before we have the Reach fully secured, they won't, Jaehaerys said. You don't know that. I know I'm not going to let them. He looked at the map, at the sea routes, at the distance between Essos and the Westerosi coast, at the current position of Euron's fleet, at the relationship between all of those things and what he had available. Euron's fleet is the link. Without it, the Golden Company has no guaranteed safe landing. They can't come ashore if they're contested on the water. You can't take 50 ships with one dragon. No, Jaehaerys said, but I can take the ones that matter. He traced the route on the map. The fleet has a command structure. Euron leads it. Remove Euron and the fleet becomes 50 ships with 50 different ideas about what to do. Remove the 5 command galleys and it becomes a mob. He looked up. I'm not trying to sink the fleet, I'm trying to make it useless. Tyrion looked at the map. He was quiet for a moment. He stopped. That's actually correct. I know. You're going to need to identify the command galleys in open water at speed while Euron tries to maneuver them. I'll know Euron's ship when I see it, Jaehaerys said. He's not the subtle type. Tyrion looked at him with the expression that had, over 3 weeks, become something Jaehaerys found genuinely useful. The look that meant Tyrion had run the numbers and arrived somewhere unexpected. You're going to go tonight, Tyrion said. Before anyone knows the Golden Company intelligence has reached you. Before Euron gets word through whatever channel that the false message was false. Tonight, Jaehaerys confirmed, just you and Drogon. Just me and Drogon. Tyrion poured wine, looked at it, set it down. You know, he said, when I crossed the Smoking Sea in a fishing boat, I thought the dangerous part was crossing the Smoking Sea. It was the easiest part, Jaehaerys said. Yes, Tyrion said, with the absolute resignation of a man who has made his peace with the world being considerably more complicated than he'd hoped. Yes, I'm beginning to understand that. Outside, the sun was going down over the Blackwater. Somewhere to the north, Daenerys and Jon were loading the last of the supplies onto the longships that would take them toward the wall, toward the cold, toward the thing at the end of all this that had been waiting since before any of them were born. Jaehaerys watched the sun go down, and then went to find Drogon. Chapter 6. The prince that was promised Euron Greyjoy's fleet was spread across the mouth of Blackwater Bay in the dark like a man showing his cards, confident, deliberate, arranged to intimidate rather than conceal. 49 ships at anchor, their lanterns making a broken line of orange light across the water. The command galleys were easy to identify even from altitude. larger, better lit, positioned at the formation center and flanks where they could coordinate the whole. Euron's own ship, the Silence, was unmistakable black-hulled, enormous, flying the Kraken sigil from 3 masts, sitting at the exact center of the formation the way a king sat at the center of a court. Jaehaerys had been up for an hour, circling at altitude in the dark, memorizing the layout. Drogon had been perfectly quiet the entire time. No sound, no fire, just the enormous black wings catching thermals, invisible against the moonless sky. The fleet below had no idea. He picked out the 5 command galleys, Euron's ship, 2 flanking vessels that were clearly communications hubs by the frequency of the small boats moving between them and the rest of the fleet, and 2 more at the outer edges that were flying the Greyjoy banner, alongside smaller pennants he didn't recognize. Hired captains, probably, the kind of independent operators who needed their own flags to remind everyone they could leave if they wanted to. He made a decision about the order. Flanking communications hubs first. Take out the fleet's ability to coordinate before Euron could give orders. Then the outer edge captains, who would scatter without someone to follow once the formation broke. Euron last, because Euron last meant Euron had to watch everything else burn before his own turn, which was a specific kind of message that Jaehaerys had decided needed sending. He leaned forward against Drogon's neck. "Ready," he said. The word was quiet, but Drogon felt it through his scales the way a horse feels a shift in its rider's weight. Drogon folded his wings. They dropped out of the dark like a stone. The first galley never had time to sound an alarm. The second one managed half a horn blast before the fire took the mast, and the hornman had more immediate concerns. The sound of burning wood and screaming men spread across the water, and the fleet's lanterns started moving. Men on decks. The clank of armor shouted orders in the dark, trying to establish what was happening and from where. Jaehaerys was already climbing again, banking hard left, coming around for the outer edge captain on the north flank. The captain's crew had seen the fire from the first 2 galleys. They were moving, trying to cut anchor and run, but a galley under oars in a crowded harbor is not a fast thing, and Drogon was. The galley turned broadside in the process of trying to maneuver, and that made what came next very simple. 3 down, 2 to go. He gave the fleet 30 seconds to panic, which was deliberate. Panic in a tight formation was its own weapon, men running the wrong direction, ships trying to move in conflicting vectors, the captains of the remaining 44 galleys trying to decide whether to run or fight without the command structure to tell them which. The 30 seconds cost him nothing and bought him a formation that was already dissolving under its own chaos. The second outer edge captain was smarter. He'd cut his anchor immediately and was making open water, away from the rest of the fleet, which was the right tactical decision, and bought him exactly nothing because open water was where Drogon was fastest. The galley burned in the dark and its crew went into the water, which was cold enough to be unpleasant but survivable, which Jaehaerys had calculated before he started. Then the silence. Euron had done something unexpected. He hadn't run, and he hadn't tried to coordinate a defense, and he hadn't ordered his crew into the panicked scramble that every other ship in the fleet was executing. The Silence was sitting exactly where it had been, anchor down, crew visible on deck, Euron Greyjoy standing at the stern with a crossbow raised. Not at Drogon, at Jaehaerys specifically. At the rider. Jaehaerys had spent enough time in Valyrian history books to know what a Valyrian dragonbinder horn looked like. Euron had one at his belt, curved ivory-bound in red gold, carved with glyphs that were a bastardized version of Valyrian binding script. He'd seen illustrations in the archives. He'd read what they did. He'd also read that they only worked once, and that working them cost the blower their life, which meant Euron wasn't going to blow it. He was showing it. The horn was the threat, the crossbow was the immediate action, and the message between them was, "I know what you are, and I have studied how to stop it, and I am not afraid of you." Jaehaerys brought Drogon in low over the silence, low enough that the downwash from his wings should by rights knock every man on deck off their feet, and it did knock most of them, but not Euron, who had apparently braced for it, who was still standing and still had the crossbow up. The bolt came and Jaehaerys moved, not dodging exactly, more receiving, the body doing the thing Daenerys had drilled into him until it was automatic, and felt it clip the leather above his left shoulder rather than his throat, which was where it had been aimed. Euron was good. Jaehaerys took Drogon up in a hard climb, and the silence was still below him, and he looked down at Euron Greyjoy, standing on the deck of his ship in the middle of a burning fleet with a spent crossbow and a horn he wasn't going to blow, looking back up. He had a choice. He could burn the silence, burn it and end Euron and remove a dangerous variable from the board permanently. The fire was right there, Drogon ready, the angle perfect. He thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Euron Greyjoy, alive and commanding a fleet of boats that had no formation and no coordination, was not the same problem as Euron Greyjoy. Alive and commanding a fleet that was intact. The fleet was already finished. The 44 remaining ships were in 4 different directions, none of them communicating, none of them coherent. Euron alone was a man with a powerful ship and nowhere useful to sail it. But Euron dead, burned in his own ship, was a story that would reach Cersei in 3 hours, and Cersei reading that story would understand that what she was dealing with was not interested in warnings. She'd consolidate harder, faster, go to ground in the Red Keep with the Golden Company as her last defensive line, and the resulting siege would cost lives, not Lannister lives, smallfolk lives, the people of King's Landing who had nothing to do with any of this and would die in the gap between a desperate queen and a fire-breathing inevitability. He let Euron Greyjoy live. He came back around for one final pass, very low, Drogon's belly nearly touching the silence's mast, and he looked down at Euron, and Euron looked up at him, and what passed between them was not the acknowledgement of mercy. Euron was too proud for mercy, and Jaehaerys hadn't offered it. It was something more operational. "I chose this. Understand what that means." Whether Euron understood it, Jaehaerys couldn't say. The man was smiling, which was either defiance or genuine madness or some specific combination of the two that made him what he was. He turned Drogon north and climbed back into the dark. He was over Dragonstone by the time the shoulder started properly hurting, which was a manageable piece of timing. The bolt had torn the leather and the skin beneath it, not deep, not dangerous, but a clean horizontal slice that was bleeding cheerfully and would need cleaning. He landed on the beach and slid off Drogon and stood for a moment letting the pain settle into its actual shape rather than the adrenaline-distorted version. Tyrion was on the beach, of course he was. The fleet, Tyrion asked, scattered, 44 ships with nobody to tell them what to do. They'll regroup eventually, but it'll take days, and by then the Golden Company's crossing window will have changed. He paused. Euron is alive. Tyrion looked at his shoulder. He clipped you. He's a good shot. Why is he alive? Jaehaerys told him. Tyrion listened with the focused quality he brought to strategy, and when it was done he was quiet for a moment and then he said, "That's yes. The siege calculation, you're right." He paused. "You worked through the entire consequence chain in mid-flight. It wasn't complicated." "It was actually," Tyrion said, with the mild firmness of someone correcting a statement that was incorrectly modest rather than genuinely modest. "It very much was. Most people would have burned the ship. Most people aren't fighting a war with 1 million dead in the north that needs to end before winter," Jaehaerys said. "Every choice I make in the south either shortens or lengthens what's happening up there. Burning Euron would have lengthened it." Tyrion looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Come inside. That cut needs cleaning and I want to hear everything before I send the ravens." The ravens went out at dawn, to the Reach Lords to Dorne, to every contact in the network that mattered. Jaehaerys sat in the map room with his shoulder cleaned and wrapped in his second cup of water while Tyrion drafted them, and he read each one before it went, which was a habit he'd been keeping since the first day. Not because he didn't trust Tyrion, he did, substantially, but because a message he hadn't read was a message he couldn't be accountable for, and accountability was the principle that had been running his decisions since the night the assassins came through the sea caves. The morning also brought a raven from the north. Not from Daenerys, too early for that, they'd only been sailing 2 days. This was from Bran Stark, which was its own kind of surprise. The message was short. Bran's messages were apparently always short. Jaehaerys was learning, written in the compressed language of someone for whom information was very dense and brevity was respect. The wall stands. The army of the dead is at Eastwatch. The Night King waits. He knows they're coming. He has always known. But he doesn't know about the fort yet. The vision is clouded there. The clouding is intentional. Come north when the south is finished. Don't wait for finished. Come when it's enough. Jaehaerys read it 3 times, then he set it down. Bran Stark, Tyrion said, reading it over his shoulder. The 3-eyed raven, Jaehaerys said. He said the Night King doesn't know about the fort. He said the vision is clouded, which means someone is clouding it, which means the children of the forest or whatever's left of them are still operating, still working to keep the location from him. He looked at the letter. Which means the fort is real. Sam's texts are real. The Night King is at Eastwatch, Tyrion said. If he breaches the wall, he won't, Jaehaerys said. Not yet, he's waiting for the dragons. Tyrion went still. He knows Daenerys is coming north. He's known for years that the dragons exist. He's been building toward them. Bran said that the Night King wants them dead or under his control. Jaehaerys stood. He's going to let her get close. He's going to draw her in. Then we need to warn. The raven was gone before Tyrion finished the sentence. Jaehaerys already at the window with the message tied and his arm out, the bird lifting away north. Tyrion watched the window for a moment. "You're going north," he said. "I'm going north," Jaehaerys confirmed. "The south is yours." Jaehaerys turned. "Tyrion, you've been running the political architecture here since the day you arrived in Valyria. You know these lords, you know Cersei, you know the Iron Bank and the Golden Company and every moving part between them." He looked at him directly. "You don't need me to hold this together. You never did." Tyrion was quiet for a moment. "That's flattering and potentially fatal," he said. "You'll have Crane and Fossaway and the Reach Lords. You'll have Davos coordinating supplies. You'll have Dorne moving north by sea." He paused. "And Cersei will hesitate. She'll wait to see what happens in the north. She always plays the long game when she doesn't have a clear, immediate advantage." He met Tyrion's eyes. "She doesn't have one, not with the fleet scattered. And if she doesn't hesitate, she will," Jaehaerys said, "because she's afraid, and afraid people who are also intelligent hesitate, they calculate, they wait for better odds." He paused. "If she doesn't, you have Drogon." Tyrion looked at him. "You're leaving me Drogon. Daenerys left me Drogon, I'm passing him on." He paused. "He won't fly for you, but he'll stay at Dragonstone and Cersei knows he's here. That's enough." Tyrion was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice that was doing the dry thing but meaning something that the dry thing was covering, "You know, when I came looking for the Dragon Queen, I expected—" "I know," Jaehaerys said. "You've told me." "Not this part," Tyrion said. "I expected to find a cause I could attach myself to. Something I could serve because I had nowhere else useful to be." He looked at the map on the table. "What I found instead was," he stopped, picked up his cup, set it down without drinking. "Just go north," he said. "Save the world, don't die." "Working on all 3, Jaehaerys said. He left Dragonstone on Jaehaerys 2 hours later. The morning was clear and cold, the narrow sea gray-green below, the mainland visible to the west. He turned north along the coast, Jaehaerys climbing steadily into the colder air, and the world opened up beneath him the way it always did at altitude, the smallness of everything human, the cities and roads and castles, the wars and politics, all of it reduced to the scale it actually occupied in the larger shape of things. He thought about what Bran had written. Come when it's enough. Not when it's done, when it's enough. The distinction mattered. Enough meant the South would still be imperfect when he left it. Enough meant some problems would be left partially solved. Enough meant trusting Tyrion with things that Tyrion was capable of handling, but that Jaehaerys would have preferred to see through himself. He found that he could do it. Not easily, the preference was real. The desire to see every piece properly settled before moving was the thing Daenerys had recognized in him from the beginning. The need to do things right that was both strength and potential paralysis. But he could do it because Bran had told him the timing, and the timing was now, and now was not the same as everything being finished. He crossed the neck at midday. North of the neck, the world changed. He'd read about it, the shift in climate, the ecology, the different quality of the light, but reading about things and flying over them were the different experiences they always were. The land below was larger and emptier, the forests denser, the gray of the sky deeper. There were fewer roads. The castles he could see from altitude were older looking, more weathered, built with a different philosophy, not to impress but to hold, to survive, to outlast. He understood, flying over it, why the North produced the kind of people it produced. The land was honest about what it was, and it made its inhabitants honest about what they were in return. He saw the Winterfell smoke in the early afternoon, the castle's hearth fires visible from 40 miles in the cold air, and he passed it without landing. He sent it a look, the way you look at a thing you'll come back to, and kept going north. He found Daenerys at sunset. The longships were 3 miles off the coast near Eastwatch, and he saw Regal first, the green-gold dragon visible from miles away, circling the ships in the low light. He brought Jaehaerys down alongside, and Daenerys was on deck at the prow, looking north at the wall. The wall. He'd seen paintings. He'd read descriptions. He'd read the engineering accounts that the Citadel had attempted over the centuries, the geological surveys, the architectural analyses. None of it had prepared him for the wall as a physical fact, 700 feet of ancient ice rising from the land like a cliff that had forgotten it, was supposed to be horizontal, stretching in both directions farther than the eye could follow, blue-white and absolute, and old in a way that made every human construction south of it look like something built yesterday. And at its base, at the Eastwatch Gate, visible even from this distance because it was not trying to be invisible, the army of the dead. They stretched north of the wall, at the edges of his vision. He couldn't see the full extent of them, couldn't count them, could only see the nearest mass. Gray-white still, the way things were still when they had no body heat and no fatigue and no reason to shift weight or adjust posture. Tens of thousands of them at minimum, and that was what he could see. Jon came up beside him as he boarded, moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been on boats enough that the motion was natural. He looked at Jaehaerys' shoulder. Your own. Last night, Jaehaerys said, it's fine. Jon looked north at the wall. You saw them. I saw them. How many? I couldn't count them. More than I expected. Jon nodded. That was the nod of a man receiving information he'd already factored in. The wall is still holding. The Night's Watch, what's left of them, won't let us through the main gate. They don't. He paused. The commander believes in the Watch's neutrality. He won't let a Targaryen force through the gate. We go over, Jaehaerys said. We go over, Jon agreed. Tonight. Daenerys was beside them now, and she looked at Jaehaerys with the comprehensive assessment she always gave him after a separation, checking, cataloging. Her eyes stopped at the shoulder. I'm fine, he said before she spoke. You went after Euron alone, she said. I went after the fleet, he said. Euron was incidental. He shot you. He clipped me. The fleet is scattered. He paused. The Golden Company crossing window is disrupted. Tyrion is managing the south. I came north because Bran sent a raven. He met her eyes. The Night King is waiting for you. He's drawing you in. He wants the dragons close. Her expression didn't change, but the quality of her stillness did, a fractional shift that he read as, I thought something like this and didn't want to be right. How close does he need them? Jon asked. Sam's text said the Night King was created with a dragonglass blade, Jaehaerys said. I think he needs one close enough to kill, close enough for whatever he has that kills dragons. He paused. Bran's message said the Night Fort is north and east of here. The army is between us and it. The Night King is in the army at the center where he can reach whatever moves toward him. Then we don't go through the center, Jon said. We go east, Jaehaerys said, like the plan. Modified, Daenerys said. She was looking north, working. If he knows we're coming, if he's drawn us here deliberately, the sea approach is compromised. He'll have dead in the water. In the water, Jaehaerys said, not above it. She looked at him. We fly. We fly, he said, all of us. The soldiers stay at Eastwatch. Jon and I go on dragons, you on Regal. You can't, she started. I can ride Regal, Jon said quietly. I know I can. He said it with the specific certainty of someone who knew the difference between confidence and certainty, and was in the second category. Daenerys looked at him. Something moved between them, the complicated recognition of two people who had been learning to trust each other across vast differences in experience and expectation. And she looked at Regal, who was circling the ships with the agitation of an animal that could smell what was coming. Jaehaerys, she said. You take Jaehaerys. I take Drogon. She stopped. You gave him to Tyrion. I gave him to Dragonstone, Jaehaerys said. There's a difference. He paused. We have Jaehaerys and Regal. That's enough for what we're doing. We're not fighting the army. We're going around it east along the coast, using the speed to outrun whatever he sends. We reach the fort. We end it. And if we can't end it, Jon said, not pessimism, pragmatism. The same quality that had been in his voice when he'd talked about people dying. The acknowledgement that worst cases existed and pretending otherwise was a different kind of recklessness. Then we learn what doesn't work and we come back, Jaehaerys said. But we can end it. Sam's text said how. We have Valyrian steel, we have dragonglass, and we have fire. He looked at Jon. And whatever you are after Melisandre brought you back, that's part of this too, the prophecy. The prince that was promised, it's not poetic, it's descriptive. Jon looked at him. I don't feel like a promised prince. Neither do I, Jaehaerys said. That's probably the point. They went over the wall at midnight. The top of the wall in the dark was a flat white expanse that felt like the top of the world. Wind scoured, absolute, with the north side dropping away into the landscape of the dead, visible from this height as a vast gray mass that extended to the horizon. Jaehaerys had read descriptions of it. He had not been prepared for the smell, the cold that was not just cold but the absence of warmth in a way that suggested the concept itself had been revoked, or for the sound, which was no sound at all. Not silence the way empty places were silent, but silence the way things were silent when everything that made sound had stopped. They didn't go down into it. They flew east along the top of the wall, then beyond it, dropping to the coast where the shivering sea hit the northern shore of Westeros in a perpetual gray collision. The dead were inland. They could see them from the air, the mass of them, but the coastal strip was clear, or mostly clear, not because the Night King hadn't thought of it, because he was letting them pass. Jaehaerys knew that. He thought about it as they flew, Jaehaerys eating the distance with the ground-covering stride of a dragon at full extension. He was being let through. This was the draw, the invitation, the Night King's patience playing out. Come to the fort. Come to me. It made the logical answer very simple. Go to the fort, but go ready for what was waiting there. He could feel the cold getting worse as they went north. Not wind chill, not weather cold. Something more fundamental. The temperature of a world from which something that made heat possible was actively withdrawing. Jaehaerys felt it too, her strokes becoming more deliberate, more powerful, as if she was pushing against something physical. Jon and Regal were 10 feet off his right shoulder. Jon's face in the dark was the face he'd come to know over 3 weeks, the face of a man who was afraid in the appropriate amounts for the situation, and was choosing action anyway. It was the right face to have in this place. The night fort appeared at the edge of vision as a darkness within the darkness, not a structure, exactly, not a building, but an absence shaped like intention. A place where the landscape stopped being geology and started being something else. Something old enough that old was the wrong word for it. They landed at the edge of it. Jaehaerys dropped from Jaehaerys and felt the ground under his feet, permafrost, solid and absolute, and looked at what was in front of him. Ruins, but not like Valyrian ruins. Those were the ruins of something that had burned down. This was the ruins of something that had stood for so long that the standing itself was the only thing left. The purpose it had been built for almost irrelevant now. The structure just the record of an effort that had been made and never entirely ended. The Night King was there. He was standing at the center of the fort, in an open space between standing stones that were covered in carvings that matched the descriptions in Sam's text. And he was not surrounded by an army. He was alone. He'd left his army at the wall, and whatever that meant, it meant something specific, something about confidence or about the terms of what was about to happen. He was tall. That was the first physical fact. Taller than a man, with the blue eyes that were not eyes in any human sense, but the visual symptom of a fundamental transformation. An armor that was not armor but ice grown into shapes that served the same function. He was looking at them with the expression that Jon had described, the expression of a problem already solved, patience fulfilled, the arrival of something long anticipated. Jaehaerys looked at him and felt in his chest, not fear but the clean recognition of, this is the thing. This is the reason for all of it. The ruins, the training, the years, the planning, the dragons, the prophecy, the blood of Rhaegar and Lyanna, and all the Targaryens before them and all the Starks before them. This moment, in this place, at this temperature, with this enemy. Jon was beside him with Longclaw, the other Longclaw, the one that had been the original, the gray and white blade he'd carried since Castle Black. 2 Valyrian steel swords, 2 sons of Rhaegar, standing in the first long night's last place. The Night King raised his hand. The dead came out of the fort itself, through the stones, out of the ground, the ancient dead who had been here since the first long night, not the recently fallen but the very old, the oldest whites there were, their faces barely recognizable as having ever been faces. 12 of them, 24, moving with the deliberate, unhurried purpose of things that had been waiting a very long time for this specific moment. Jon went left. Jaehaerys went right. What followed was not a heroic battle in the sung-about sense. It was close and brutal and fast, the Valyrian steel doing the work it was made for, the dead falling and not getting back up the way dead things fell in the south, each contact a decision, angle, timing, the placement of feet on uneven frozen ground, the space between one attacker and the next. Jaehaerys had been fighting stone guardians in Valyrian ruins since he was 9. He had been training with Corvo's anti-group techniques since he was 12. He had been drilling against multiple opponents every single day since they landed at Dragonstone. He was through his half of them in 140 seconds. Jon finished his half in 2 minutes, which was objectively fast by any standard that wasn't Jaehaerys. The Night King had not moved. He was still at the center of the fort, watching, and his expression had not changed, But there was something different in it now, something that was not the outcome he'd calculated, and for the first time Jaehaerys thought, he genuinely didn't expect this. Not the defeat of the Whites, he'd planned for that. He'd expected it to cost more. He'd expected what he was looking at to be diminished. It wasn't. The Night King raised both hands. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees in 2 seconds, and the ice came, not weather, not frozen precipitation, but directed cold, the cold as a weapon, moving toward both of them like a wall. Jaehaerys did the only thing that made sense. "Dracarys," he said. Jaehaerys' fire hit the cold wall from the left. Jon had moved the moment he saw Jaehaerys' intention, tracking the action, and Rhaegal hit the wall from the right, and between the two streams of dragonfire the cold wall shattered, the ice becoming steam, becoming nothing, the directed cold breaking apart in the heat. The Night King looked at the place where his weapon had been. Then he looked at them. Jon was moving before the fire died, running toward the Night King directly, which was either the bravest thing Jaehaerys had ever seen or the most effective use of the Night King's moment of recalibration, probably both. The Night King had time to bring his hand up, and where his hand was there was ice, sudden and directional, and Jon went through it the way he'd apparently learned to go through things, taking the impact on his shoulder, spinning with it rather than against it, coming up under the Night King's reach. Longclaw went in. Not into the chest. Jon had aimed for the chest, and the ice armor had deflected it, but under the arm, into the side, the place where the dragonglass blade had gone in 10,000 years ago when the children of the forest had made this thing. The place that Sam's text had described as the binding point. The original wound that had never entirely healed because nothing about the Night King had been meant to heal. The Night King's expression finally changed. Jaehaerys was there a half-second later, on the other side. Longclaw aimed for the same point, the same binding, the convergence of two Valyrian blades at the center of what had been done here so long ago. The sound that came out of the Night King was not a human sound, and not a dragon sound, and not anything Jaehaerys had ever heard in 16 years of growing up in a place full of inhuman sounds. It was the sound of something fundamental being undone, a resonance that was felt in the chest rather than heard with the ears, a vibration that traveled through the frozen ground and up through the soles of his boots and through his whole body. The ice armor cracked. Then it shattered. And then the Night King, there was a Valyrian word for it in Sam's text that translated imperfectly. Unmade was the closest. Not killed because killing implied life, and the Night King had not been alive in the conventional sense for 10,000 years. He was unmade, reversed, returned to the state before the dragonglass blade, before the binding, before any of it. The form he occupied dissolved the way ice dissolved in fire, rapidly and completely, and what was left was nothing at all. The cold lifted. Jaehaerys stood in the fort with Jon beside him and felt the temperature change, felt it viscerally, the return of normal cold replacing the supernatural cold, the difference between weather and intention. Jaehaerys made a sound, not the settling sound, something larger, a sound of release, like pressure equalizing. Rhaegal made the same sound from the other side. From the direction of the wall far away, a sound rose in the night that was both horrible and deeply final, the sound of 40,000 dead things stopping. Not falling exactly, just stopping. The silence that followed it was enormous. Jon was breathing hard. He had ice on his shoulder from the impact, melting now. He looked at the place where the Night King had been, and there was something in his expression that was not triumph. Triumph was what you felt when you'd won something you'd wanted. This was the expression of someone who had finished something necessary and was aware of the enormity of what had just changed. "Is that?" Jon said. "Yes," Jaehaerys said. Jon exhaled, long, slow, a breath that was carrying more than a breath usually carried, They stood in the fort together for a long moment. The stones around them were just stones again. The ground was just frozen ground. The sky above was the same sky that was above the south, the same stars, the same dark. The cold was the honest cold of a northern winter rather than the weaponized cold of something that had been trying to consume the world. "We have to go back," Jon said, eventually. "Yes, there's still Cersei. Yes. And the Northern Lords," Jon said, "and the Reach Alliance and Dorne, and the Iron Throne and the question of who sits in it and how," and he stopped, looked at Jaehaerys. "All of it. All of it," Jaehaerys confirmed. "That's a lot." "It is," Jaehaerys said, "but it's a lot of living problems. Living problems can be solved." He paused. "The dead one is done." Jon looked at him, and something in his expression moved into the territory of the almost smile, and this time it went further than it usually did, which was all the way. "Told you," Jon said. "Told me what?" "That if we survived it, I'd have an answer for you." He paused. "The difference between a burden and a purpose." Jaehaerys waited. "That," Jon said, nodding at the place where the Night King had been. "That was purpose. Carrying it without knowing if you'd get here, that was the burden, but this is what it was for." He paused. "Ask me which way I was facing." Jaehaerys looked at him for a moment. "Forward," he said. "Forward," Jon agreed. They flew south with the dawn coming up behind them, the sky going from black to deep blue to the gray of early morning. The wall was still standing. Below it, where the army of the dead had been, was nothing, not bodies. Not frozen ground marked by passage, just the land as it had been before. The dead had dissolved with their king, unmade in the same reversal, returned to whatever state they'd been taken from. The Night's Watch gate was open when they arrived. The commander was an old man who looked like he'd been awake all night, probably because the watch had felt whatever happened at the fort through the wall itself, through the ancient magic, the lifting of the pressure that had been building for years. He looked at Jaehaerys and Jon with the expression of a man who has just been proven wrong about something he'd been certain about for a long time and has the integrity to know it. "Your Grace," he said to Jon. Then he looked at Jaehaerys. He didn't know what to call him, which was honest. Nobody had entirely settled that question yet. "My lord," he said finally, which was at least direction. "The wall held," Jaehaerys said. "The wall held," the commander agreed. There was something in it, something that was both pride and grief, and the complicated feeling of something that had been your life's purpose suddenly discovering it had been served. "It'll need to keep holding," Jaehaerys said. "Not against the dead, against winter. Against the things that live in the dark that aren't the Night King." He looked at the old man. "The watch isn't finished. The North still needs it." Something in the commander's bearing changed. The relief of a man who had been afraid the answer to that question was Daenerys was outside the wall with her soldiers, and she came across the frozen ground at a pace that was controlled but not slow, and she looked at Jaehaerys and Jon and completed her assessment in 3 seconds, and then she looked at the place where the army had been. "How?" she said. "Sam was right," Jaehaerys said. "The fort, the binding point, 2 Valyrian blades." She was quiet for a moment, looking at the empty landscape, which was just a landscape now. The sky above was clear for the first time since they'd come north, genuinely clear blue coming through the gray, the sun doing something real rather than something apologetic. "It's over," she said, not quite a question. "The dead are done," Jaehaerys said. "The rest of it is still there." "Cersei." "Cersei," he confirmed. "And the Golden Company and the Iron Bank and the Reach Alliance and the succession question and everything else that was a problem before the dead were and is still a problem now." She looked at him. "That doesn't bother you." "Human problems don't bother me," he said. "Human problems can be argued with. They can be negotiated, managed, solved. The Night King couldn't be argued with." He paused. "Cersei can." "She won't," Daenerys said. "She'll have to," Jaehaerys said. "Because we're going to give her a choice that's real, not the choice between compliance and fire, but the choice between what she could still be and what the war has made her." He paused. "She loves her children. She's always loved her children. The Lannisters who are still alive, the world that still exists for people she loves to live in. That's real. We work with what's real. Daenerys looked at him for a long moment. You're not going to burn King's Landing. No, he said. Neither are you. She held his gaze. Something moved in her expression. Something that was the meeting of what she'd always believed and what she'd sometimes feared. The confirmation of a thing that she'd taught him and had needed, sometimes, to be taught back. No, she said. Neither am I. Jon was standing a few feet away with the patient quality of a man who understood that some conversations needed to complete themselves, and he waited until they had, and then he said, I need to go to Winterfell. Sansa needs to hear this from me. Go, Jaehaerys said. And then south, Jon said. This question of what happens next, the throne, the claim, the North's place in all of it, we do that together. All of us at the same table. All of us at the same table, Jaehaerys agreed. Jon looked at him for a moment. You know this is going to be harder than the Night King, he said. The political peace, the succession. Getting 20 lords who all think they're the most important person in Westeros to agree on anything. Harder how, Jaehaerys said. We have 3 dragons. Jon Snow, king in the north, looked at him with an expression that was deeply resigned and entirely fond. Of course, he said. Of course you'd say that. I learned it from Daenerys, Jaehaerys said. I did not teach you that, Daenerys said. You taught me everything, he said. Some of it I applied creatively. She looked at the sky. The expression on her face was the real one, the open one, unguarded, the one that was warm and exasperated and fundamentally, irrevocably, completely full of love that had been refined by 16 years in a burning city into something that was going to last the rest of her life regardless of what happened to the politics. The dragons, she said finally to herself, to the sky, to the long arc of everything that had led here. It's always the dragons. Jaehaerys looked at the clear sky above the north, at the sun that was coming up properly now, doing actual work, and felt the cold shifting into something that was just winter, honest, manageable, the kind you survived and moved through. He thought about all of it. Valyria, the ruins, the years, the training, the crossing, Dragonstone, the Reach Lords, the meeting with Cersei, the fleet, Tyrion in the corridor with his wine, Davos on his fishing boat, the fort in the dark, Jon's Longclaw and his own meeting at the binding point. He thought about what Daenerys had told him on the high ledge in Valyria, the last night before they left. Whatever you find there, whoever you meet, whatever they tell you about who you are and what you're supposed to do, remember that. Remember that I stayed because of you. He remembered. Right, he said. He said it to Daenerys, to Jon, to the north, to the wide-open sky and the living south and the living world and everything that came next, which was going to be complicated and political and argument-filled, and exactly the kind of problem he'd been built for. Let's go finish it. He walked to Jaehaerys and she lowered her head and he swung up, and the wings spread, and the sun caught the scales, and the sky was completely clear, and the world below was alive. Jaehaerys Targaryen, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, raised in the ruins of the greatest civilization that ever burned, pointed Jaehaerys south and flew toward everything that still needed doing. And he was not afraid. He had never been afraid. He was ready.